would like to call the budget meeting of November 13th, 2024 to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is Greg Reimer, Councillor and Chair of the Budget Committee. I would like to begin by reading a safety notice. In the event of emergency, please evacuate council chambers to the nearest exit through the chamber doors and obey all instructions given, and if assistance is required, please see the clerk to my right. Once you have evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of Town Hall. Also, please ensure your cell phones are on silent or are turned off. And lastly, the Town of Lincoln Council meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. Closed captioning is available on all our videos by selecting the closed captioning button on the bottom right of the video. Roll call this evening. Members of committee are in attendance. And we also have lots of staff here this evening. Thank you for coming. Declarations of interest. Number 3, are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Number 4 is confirmation of agenda. Please be advised that the 2025 rates and 2025 fees and charges, which was advertised and scheduled for the consideration at the November 13th Budget Committee, has been deferred to the November 25th Budget Committee meeting. Additionally, the order of the agenda has been amended to allow for the Physician Recruitment Incentive Program, Report AD-10-24, to precede the 2025 Operating Budget Introduction, Report FN-18-24. Statutory public meetings. We have no statutory public meetings this evening. Number 6, delegations. We have no delegations. Consent agenda. We have no consent agenda items this evening. Regular agenda, number 8. We are now considering item 8.1, Report FN-20-24, Capital Budget Report Backs. The CAO, Mr. Kokopoulos, will provide introductory comments. Mike, please go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and good evening to you, Vice Chair Russell, and members of Council. This is our capital staff report back. And beyond just introductory comments, this is a presentation that both Charlotte, Dave Graham, and I will split because each of us took, I think, different parts of this particular item. I do want to clarify in the report back, as we wait for the presentation to be loaded, that there's 2 items that we're reporting back, and that is Sand Road and the bridges, both Tamarack and West Avenue. And then in terms of Green Lane, that is really an administrative clarification and an approval that's required following the last meeting. Now, of course, with any one of these, we're in council's hands should you have any questions in terms of us providing any clarifying points, but just wanted to clarify those 3. I'll be speaking to Sand Road. Director Graham will be speaking to number 2, and then collectively we can answer any administrative clarification type questions that you may have or report back questions on item 3 being Green Lane. So item 1, Sand Road Drainage Assessment. Council will recall we had a very lengthy conversation when we were in front of you a few weeks ago. And the purpose of us being in front of you is really to report back on those conversations. You asked me at that particular point in time to speak to 2 individuals or 2 organizations relative to the assessment study and to get feedback from them in terms of their comments, their willingness to be a partner at the table, and their willingness to look at that assessment once it's completed and potentially share in whatever comes out of that particular assessment. I spoke with Adrian Tenna Russell, who is in charge of this east area within CN, and they expressed a strong willingness to collaborate with the town to address any issues that were stemming from the railway infrastructure. I indicated to him that there is a review forthcoming and that should anything come of that study, that we would be sharing that information, but also that it was important for council to hear back from them that they were willing to share in whatever upgrades needed to happen if it was deemed that those upgrades were needed or as a result of what was happening at the CN rail lines. The next group that we spoke to was Golden Horseshoe Estates. And as you can see, the response is there in front of you. I spoke with Graham Hines. He is the operations manager. There recently was new ownership at this particular location. And I think similarly, they were open to being a participant, being a partner at the table relative to the study, and if there were any issues, seeking resolution to those issues at hand. I did indicate that, again, there may be costs, and I would look at some sort of tripartite type agreement, depending on what the assessment study looks at, that would look at us sharing costs and what those would be. Of course, everyone's caveat is, they really want to see the study first, and following the study, if there is any fault of either of those organizations, then of course they want to ensure that both residents in the municipality, in terms of CN, the municipality, and in terms of residents, Golden Horseshoe Estates, addresses the particular concern. They did express gratitude, as I said, for the municipality's ongoing communication, and do want to resolve the concerns at this site. So I could say in both meetings, I left feeling positive about the conversations. It's not always you get CN to respond as quickly as they did in this particular case. So I take that as a good sign. And so I would say in terms of staff's recommendation following the discussion, in terms of what council wanted to hear, we are suggesting proceeding with the study as laid out. And then once the study is complete, report back to council, but also engage as quickly as possible with both CN and the Golden Horseshoe Estates group. And of course, we're going to continue to monitor site conditions over the winter and I think do any immediate work or address any immediate concerns that may be there while this assessment takes place. So Chair, maybe I'll stop there, see if there's any questions on this one in particular, before passing it on to Dave to look at the following bridge report back.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Any questions to project 2025-85 Sand Road Drainage Assessment? Councillor Timmers, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Reimer, through you to our CAO. So the drainage assessment, is this going to be encompassing just the town road? Or are we going to be assessing the CN property and the Golden Horseshoe property as well?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll let Dave Graham maybe speak to the specifics. However, Councillor, it would entail all three. I think we need to look at the entire site in that particular area, and there's really three people involved, or three groups involved: the town, the Golden Horseshoe Estates, as well as CN. So the assessment would be looking at all three.
Okay, I really do understand the need and, what's been happening down in that area. It's in Ward 4. It's been an ongoing for about 15 years. Before I even came to council, it's been an issue. I guess my point is, I was hoping that they would share in a portion of the cost, considering we're looking at their properties as well. So was there any discussion of that?
Mr. CEO.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think both organizations said, following the study, if it's deemed that there is significant involvement that both have to take at that particular point in time, they'd be open and willing to look at some sort of cost sharing. Now, of course, once the study assessment's done, it may be a little bit harder to go back and get money from them, but they've both committed to cost sharing the assessment itself if it's deemed that they're held responsible, as well as any repairs that need to happen.
Okay, well, I think that was the answer I was hoping to hear. This is not something that we can ignore. It's definitely a problem in that area. So those are my comments. So thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Timmers. Councillor Njima, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Reimer. I have two questions. One is a little bit further to Councillor Timmers' question. But the first question is, when you were speaking with CN, was there any sort of, I know that Director Graham has been in touch with them over the years, and I'm not sure whether there was acknowledgement that there's an issue or that there's partial it's partially to do with what's happening on their lands or not during those conversations, but during this conversation, there just seemed to be some recognition that this issue, I mean, it sounds like it had a positive outcome. So in a way, they're sort of acknowledging that it could have something to do with what's happening or not happening on their lands, but was it out and out stated that they agree that it could have something to do with what's happening on their lands?
Through you,
CEO?
Mr. Chair, to the councillor. Dave can speak to previous conversations, but I can tell you in this conversation, they were very careful not to accept any responsibility at this particular point in time. They do want the study completed, and following the completion of the study, if it's deemed that anything happening with respect to CN rail lines and the adjoining properties that are theirs have impacted what's happening in terms of the runoff, in terms of the flooding, then they're willing to sit down and accept whatever responsibility is deemed appropriate in terms of cost sharing with respect to a repair. But they were very careful, which I would expect them to be careful in terms of, at this particular point in time, accepting any responsibility. They believe they've done the work that they need to do on their rail lines in terms of just general upgrades, the way they were laid, any of the work done around them. To the best of their abilities, they were engineered appropriately. And so again, I would say, I think the answer to that is, Councillor, they're just very careful in terms of right now acknowledging or accepting responsibility. But, I'm optimistic, or, I take comfort in the comment that they shared with me, and that is, should there need to be works done with respect to our particular property and anything that is CN, that they would participate in those cost-sharing arrangements.
Okay. And another question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So I don't recall the details of what we talked about at the last meeting in terms of how this would roll out, but presumably there'd be an RFP of some kind to have a consultant do this work. And who would be involved in determining the scope of that study? Would there be any involvement from Golden Horseshoe Estates and/or CN? Because I would think if either and both are agreeing that they'll take that study as the answer as to whether they have responsibility in the issue. If the study is the answer, I would think they'd want to be in on what the scope of the study is and how it rolls out.
Go ahead, Ms. CO.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think it's a good question, Councillor, in terms of what their involvement would be. I would suggest, the lead agency for that is the town of Lincoln. We will be working closely with conservation authorities and others that have jurisdiction in that particular area. And of course, we'll share information. I think we'll share the scope of work, the terms of reference with our partner agencies. But it is the town's assessment study at this particular point in time. And I think notwithstanding the fact that they're going to participate in whatever the outcome is, licensed registered professionals are conducting these studies. And I think they're going to adhere and agree to the resolution or the solutions that potentially come out of the study.
Councillor?
So are we thinking that we'll be in touch with both the Golden Horseshoe Park and CN throughout the process and keeping them in touch and keeping them aware of what's happening as it moves through so it's not a big surprise in the end?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that was definitely my commitment, Councillor, is keeping those lines of communication open.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Meklik, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Through you to our CAO. So I find it like this was a delegation that came this year and we're looking at it right away. Is it typical for us to, be this quick, this responsive with requests like this? And I ask that because we have a better idea what our impact to the levy will be. When we were first presented this, we didn't know what, the potential increase to the levy would be. But now, knowing what we know after seeing the operations budget, I feel like, we should maybe try to find ways to knock that number, that potential number down a bit. And is this not something we could do maybe next year when we see it coming? Because this is a relatively new ask, in my opinion.
Ms. CO?
Through you, Mr. Chair, a couple parts to that question, Councillor. In terms of how quickly we respond to things, we aren't necessarily making a recommendation on the works. Right now, we're looking at trying to assess, is there a problem? Because we've heard from residents for a number of years that there's problems in this particular location. So I would say, I think to your first question, are we too responsive or are we responding too quickly, and is that typical? I think when things come in, when residents make concerns known, we try to action most of them immediately. Some require us to go out and look at them. Some require quick, short fixes. Some are different fixes that require expertise at the table. I think in this particular case, we're looking at expertise. The question, I think, is really council's in terms of, can this be delayed another year? I think we're in council's hands in that. We've brought forward some of the complaints we've heard. There's a petition that came forward in March of 2024, and we're before you now, about 6 months later, saying for it to act on that, we simply can't take the petition saying there's issues here and here's who we think the issues are a result of. What we're here saying is that if there are issues, and maybe we can agree that there are issues at that site, we need to ascertain why there's issues, who's the cause of those issues, and then come back to you with a potential plan, which may be a longer-term plan, right, depending on the cost, depending on the issue, and depending on where the fault may or may not lie.
Thank you. It's, full honesty, this is the first I've heard of this. I've not heard of this before. So this is, maybe the ward councillors are more familiar with this, but this is the first I've heard of this. And that's the concern I have. And the other concern I have is that if I was the manager, or if I was a property owner, or I was the owner of that trailer park, and it was that significant of a concern for me as a property owner or stakeholder, I would be willing to pay. If it was that serious of a problem, and I'm not saying it's not serious, if it was that serious of a problem, I would be bellying up, and I would be more than happy to pay a portion of it, just as a demonstration of the severity of this problem. But I struggle a bit when there's folks out there that say, well, if it's on us, then we'll help out. But I think we know what's going to happen down the road. There's not, that's not, might not happen. And through you to Charlotte, it's being funded by $75,000 in the Infrastructure Reserve Fund. So it doesn't appear to be a levy impact. But what does that do to our infrastructure reserve balance?
Through you,
Go ahead,
Chair, to the
Charlotte.
Councillor, thank you for that question. I think one thing that we are going to talk about in the later presentation is about the infrastructure gap. So the reason for the increase in the operating budget is to try to narrow that gap. And that gap is a result of what we're looking at to maintain our infrastructure over the long term, the amount that we need to be contributing, and trying to catch up for that amount. So a 1 year change in a project or delaying, it doesn't mean we are in council's hands. It doesn't mean you can't change that, but it wouldn't change my recommendation of the amount that we need to be contributing in order to try to start to bolster the infrastructure reserve fund and put away enough to maintain our assets over time. So it is funded by the tax levy through the infrastructure reserve fund, in short, but the amount that we want to contribute annually is a target in order to sustainably fund our capital assets.
Okay, so just because we're using the infrastructure reserve fund doesn't, we still have to put into it. That's basically what you're saying there.
Yeah,
So-
exactly.
And then third question, would this be my third?
Go ahead, Councillor.
What impact to the levy would this make? How much would we save this year if we were to postpone this $75,000 spend?
Through you, Chair, to
Go
the
ahead, Charlotte.
councillor, In my mind, nothing, because that's where I'm trying to say that increase that's in the operating budget isn't a reflection of this year's projects. It's a reflection of what we need over time to get at a level that's needed to fund our assets. So if you wanted to reduce it purely because of the Sand Road project, you could. However, I wouldn't be recommending it because we need to be putting more away every year, whether we do this particular project or not.
Okay, thank you.
And to answer your question, $75,000 is probably about 1/4%.
Thank you, Charlotte. You have a comment, Mike? Just before, I'll just shed a little bit of light. Councillor Mikulik just asked about the road councillors. This is certainly not the first time that this has happened. I think some of the email trails back to town predate Lynn's, Councillor Timmer's time on the council. It definitely happens more frequently, the flooding, and increase in severity. And I realize I live this type of work, but it is our water that comes there, right? So that drainage doesn't just happen on the Golden Horseshoe Court and the CN. It drains, David, from Camden, some of that stuff, right? That's where the watershed is what the issue is here, and it's our watershed. And so part of the issue also is we don't know, we need to have a report before we can move forward. This is just the beginning of works, possibly. So nothing can be done by anybody until something like this is moved forward. So, sorry, Ms. Shea, you were going to make a comment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, I think I was just, gonna, reiterate what Charlotte said, but she did a good job speaking to it. We need to be putting money in the bank. And so whether the 75 is spent on this particular project or it's kept in the bank, we're still recommending put money in the bank. Charlotte says it much more technical than I, but the gist of it is we need to put money. It's just called the infrastructure bank in my mind, but that's what it is. We need to be putting money away, and so it isn't necessarily a savings, but council absolutely can defer it by a year. I mean, I think we're in council's hands with that.
Councillor Timmers, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Reimer. My questions earlier were just simply, I was looking to hear if there would be any portion given by the other two parties. That's all I was looking at. And I personally support this 100%. Putting this off another year, I think, is a really bad idea. We're going to have the chambers full of people again when the spring water, the spring rains start. Last year was horrendous what happened down in there. And the owners of the properties in there are having a hard time getting insurance. We can't continue, we can't just sit back and say, oh, let's just wait another year, because they'll be flooded again. And as Councillor Reimer said, every year it's getting worse and worse. And we do have a part in it for sure with the watershed. We do need to get to the bottom of it and finally figure out what exactly is happening and why. So I'm really happy that this is going to happen because it's been plenty of years, at least 20. I'm guessing it's probably longer, but anyway, those are my comments. I simply cannot support putting this off another year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jima, please go ahead.
Not a question, but I just wanted to repeat what I said last time when we discussed this. I've been out there too, at least once with Dave Graham and sat in the driveway and been a part of many conversations, emails back and forth about the flooding there, even though it's not in my ward. So I'm aware of it being in existence for at least 6 or 7 years. I've seen it. It floods in the ditch across the road, goes across right into the Golden Horseshoe area, floods their whole driveway, floods beyond. I haven't been there in a few years, but when I saw it there, we saw it right in the puddle in the driveway. And so I just wanted to say that I've seen it and that I'm aware that it's a problem. It's been a problem for many years.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mikulik. Now we're moving on to number 2.
No, I just, through you, just, if this study determines, I'm hearing this, it could be a surface water, could be our problem that's creating this. If we find this out, if it's determined that it's a town of Lincoln issue, how quickly do we have to act on that? What if it turns into a project that would cost $3, $4, $5 million? Would we be responsible to act in a timely manner if we find out that this is formally an issue that we're creating?
CEO?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, I think that's a question I really can't answer, and I think it would be I mean, I don't think it's a
Yeah.
wise question for me to answer
No,
right
but
now
this is
because
a-
I don't know what it'll show. Should it show that the town has responsibility? I think we'll have to determine the scope of that responsibility, and then we're going to be before you, I think, with options. And so, yeah, I think it would be hard for me to say right now what would be the cost for the repair and is there any liability. I think those are some downstream, no pun intended, issues that we're going to have to potentially look at. And so I think those are things we'll be in front of council with when the report, should you approve it, comes back.
Okay, like I said, I'm just concerned about like that 10-year capital forecast just ballooning with unexpected or unanticipated. That's just today. We don't know about tomorrow. That's why I'm concerned, but, okay.
Thank you, Counselor. Charlotte, are you taking Tamarack? Sorry,
Davis.
Director Graham. Project 2024-25, Tamarack Avenue, West Avenue pedestrian bridge replacements. Sorry, Mr. CO, did you have some more comments? Or you
Mr. Chair, no.
You wanted to keep talking? You're
No,
good?
no, I mean, I could if you want.
We have to give you a break.
But no, I'm
We'd
good.
like to hear from Director Graham. You can come back later. Go ahead, David.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to committee. So I'm gonna speak about the two pedestrian bridges, Tamarack Ave and West Avenue. I think we had a really good discussion at our last budget meeting. Committee had a lot of good suggestions and good ideas to look at some further options. So we've had an opportunity to do that, and we want to report back on this right now with our slides before you tonight here. So, you know, one of the items we wanted to look at was the type of materials that we're using for the bridges. You know, can we look at something a little more cost effective, or look at, you know, any new types of materials that we should be considering to kind of help manage the costs of this work. Sorry about that. So just for some context, when you're selecting materials for a pedestrian bridge, to replace a pedestrian bridge, there's a number of different factors that you want to consider. Cost affordability is a big one. We also want to look at the expected service life of the material that we select for the bridge. And we want to have an understanding of future maintenance demands and the overall durability of the material. And we have to look at the localized conditions or the specific application where this bridge is going to be placed. And when we look at that, we have to look at what's the environment that we're putting the bridge into. Is it like a natural environment or more of a hard environment? Exposure to salt is a really big one for corrosion to really help dictate the type of material. And also you look at your site access. So is the bridge like in a remote location and hard to get to with equipment? Because most of these bridges are prefabricated bridges, so they bring those bridges to the site. So you want to be able to, can you get a crane in there? Can you get equipment in there? So all factors to consider in terms of the material for weight, if you have to lift stuff. So this slide here, just to kind of give you an idea on the different types of material that you would consider for pedestrian bridges. So weathering steel, that's the recommended material that we're recommending for the project. The picture there on the right-hand side of the slide is an example of a weathering steel bridge. And this is what the project team is recommending for the bridge replacement. Just a couple notes on weathering steel. So it's different than normal steel. Weathering steel, what happens is it's a higher grade of steel. So as it weathers with the natural elements, it develops like a protective patina, if you will. It's like an iron oxide that forms on top of the steel, and that actually protects the steel from rusting further or corroding further. It's about, we've read information, it can be 3 times as resistant to corrosion as just a normal steel. And you wouldn't paint this type of steel, it doesn't need to be painted, so you don't have those ongoing maintenance costs. Again, it'd be prefabricated, and the service life of weathering steel is 50-plus years. Another type of material, composite fiber, I think at our last meeting, that was what we were referring to as fiberglass. It's 2.5 to 3 times more costly than weathering steel. Has a longer service life, 75-plus years. You can also look at aluminum for your bridge material. 2 times more costly than weathering steel. Has a service life, 50-plus years, depending. And you can also look at wood. Obviously, wood is probably the most economical type of material. Would have the lowest service life cycle. And for this particular application, we're not recommending wood because of the span of the creek. It's quite a span that we have to get across the creek. And if we put a wood bridge in, speaking to our engineering team, we'd have to have a number of supports under that wood bridge that would go through the creek and would impact the creek in terms of its flow and have environmental impacts. So we're not recommending wood. So we also wanted to look at cost-effective options to consider for the West Avenue pedestrian bridge. So the one option we looked at was replace like for like. So we wouldn't put a wider bridge in at West Avenue with the understanding that we'd be putting a wider bridge in at Tamarack Avenue. So if we just put in a narrow like-for-like bridge at West Avenue, we could drop the cost by about 20% by putting in a smaller bridge. Again, we looked at wood. We thought, that might be a way to try and replace the West Avenue bridge at a cheaper alternative. But again, for this location, it's just not feasible with the span of the creek and all the MPCA requirements that we'd have to meet. So, and we had a good discussion last week, or at the last budget meeting, and looking at replacing the Tamarack Bridge as the higher priority. The map there on the right-hand side of the slide is a bit of a recap, just to show you where the bridges are. That one, we've collected data in the summer and the fall, and it's used a lot more than the West Avenue Bridge. Plus, the Tamarack Bridge has better connectivity on more main active transportation routes. Continue to frequently inspect the West Avenue Bridge. It is in poor condition to ensure it's safe for public usage. If we have to close the West Avenue Bridge because of its poor condition, the idea would be the Tamarack Bridge would be in place and would be an alternative or be a crossing for pedestrians to use in that area. So what staff's recommending at this point is we only approve the replacement of the Tamarack Bridge. Again, higher priority bridge at a cost of $470,000. Bridge material of weathering steel is recommended. Again, it's the most common material used for pedestrian bridges by municipalities and has a long service life. And obviously, we continue to inspect the West Avenue Bridge on a frequent basis to ensure it's safe for public usage. If we find that we have to close it, we'd have the Tamarack Bridge as our main crossing. In the interim, until the town decides either to replace the West Avenue Bridge or remove it in the future. I think when we're at that stage, you would probably want to do some consultation with residents, do some surveys, get some feedback on the West Avenue Bridge, but that's our recommendation at this point in time. So happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Graham, for that report. Councilor Brunei, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Reimer. Through you to Mr. Graham. Dave, thanks for these reports. Please bear with me. I wasn't here for the capital discussion on this, so I'm wondering if you could just refresh my memory as to how old are these bridges that we're considering replacing? How old are they?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, we estimate they're around 35 years old, maybe close to 40, 35 to 40.
So were they constructed with weathered steel?
No, through you, Mr. Chair, they were just normal steel and they were painted.
I guess they ask that question because, every time we look at something, we talk about, lifespan. And so we're talking about 50 years, but yet we're replacing a bridge that only lasted 35. So, I'm just asking that question because I'd hate to see in 35 years that we're replacing this bridge again. So I'm wondering if you have a comment on
Yeah.
that.
Through Mr. Chair, great comment. So what we think on the bridges that we're replacing, and you've seen the pictures, there's a lot of corrosion. We think when they first went in, they might have had salt usage. So that's a huge problem. You don't want to be putting salt on steel bridges, even the weathered steel that we're recommending. You don't want to salt that type of bridge. And we don't salt these bridges because they cross Conkle Creek. For environmental reasons, we wouldn't salt them anyway. So we feel that, that's probably one of the reasons those ones deteriorated. Also talking to our engineers, when we put in the new bridges, we want to make sure we're doing the best we can for corrosion. We feel on the old bridges, there wasn't drain holes in the metal, so the tubing is hollow inside, and if it gets moisture in it, it runs to low spots and then can freeze and burst out and stuff like that. So that might have been another factor as well. Whereas on the new bridges, we're going to be looking at all those enhancements for proper drainage and et cetera in the metal, but
A second question,
Go
Chair?
ahead, Counselor.
Thank you, Chair. So thanks, Dave, for that response on that. So just, I wanted to go at this from just a slightly different angle. So I remember when Councillor Michalak and I sat down with yourself and Shannon and Dave Warden in one of our touch points earlier this year. I asked the question, have we ever done any counts? And the answer was no, but we will. So I'm wondering, with the understanding that, this is a huge connection point with Conkle Creek, and, we're hoping to extend this along Green Lane and go out to the roundabout. So connectivity is foremost, and we're always talking about active transportation. So with that in mind, we did traffic counts, but usage. But could you explain how that was done? Because I've thought about this over the last few weeks, and and if I've got a dog and I'm walking my dog twice a day, and I walk it for 3 months, that would be 180 counts. I'm just wondering how the counts were done.
Director Graham, please
Mr.
go
Chair,
ahead.
to the counselor. Good question. So we have a device that is basically designed to measure pedestrian counts or movement across it. So we put it on the bridge. I'm just trying to think, I have it in my notes here, but we had the device out for a few weeks in order to collect the total of data. We had it out for, I think it was towards the end of the summer, midsummer, and then we did it again in September because we wanted to kind of do a summer and fall count. And then we took all that data and averaged it per day. So I don't know if that
But
helped.
you understand what I'm saying, right?
Right.
So if I had a wife and the two of us walked our dog every day for 3 months, that would be 240 counts.
Yeah, through Mr. Chair, I believe, so how it works is the movement going by it, so if two people are walking, it wouldn't necessarily pick that out. It's
It'd
like,
just be counted as one.
that's right,
Okay.
that's
Okay.
right.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Counselor? Counselor Patriva, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Reimer. Dave, thank you for running this down for me. This is one of my little idiosyncrasies that I delve into. Okay, agreed with the weathering steel, though it's got timber boards. So there's going to be an operational cost of replacing the timber boards because they're not going to last 50 years, are they?
No.
What's the lifespan on those?
Through Mr. Chair to the councilor, probably 20 years on the boards.
Okay, so
And one of the reasons, so it's a good question. So, we've had this discussion with our project team, and so we're also trying to be mindful, and we heard a lot from public on ward meetings and et cetera. We want something that's not going to be slippery, so when it's raining or wet. So if you put like some of the composite material or metal, it can get slippery. So in speaking to even other municipalities, the wood is kind of a good way to go in terms of having traction for people going across. And it's easy for us to maintain. If there's a broken board, it's just, we can easily fix it in-house. We don't have some specialized material to have to deal with. So that's kind of, the factors that we're going with for the wood.
Okay.
But yeah, it would have a shorter service life than the actual bridge structure.
Okay, because through you, Chair Reimer, yeah, I was thinking a combination of the two, the weathering steel bridge with composite boards, right? Because then the composite would give you that environmental friendliness. They last, there's more durability on it. They're not all slippery. I have a composite deck that I built with my father 25 years ago. That's fine. I mean, it gets a little hot if you're in bare feet, but I can't see a lot of people crossing this in bare feet, so just, a power wash in the spring, and it's fine. Like, it's virtually maintenance-free. And it's the base that you have to worry about, but with this case, it's the steel, so it's virtually maintenance-free, because there's gonna be an operational cost for the wood, right? And when they break, you're gonna be out of commission, because you won't want people crossing it with a broken board. So I just think that might be a better route. So, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Murray, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair, through you to Director Graham. Thank you very much, Dave. So I'm just looking at the original budget, which was $940 for two bridges. So I'm assuming that if it's $470 for one bridge, that means that the weathering steel and the timber was your original plan, right?
Yep.
So when we look at that, and that's the original plan, and we don't do anything with West Ave at this point, we just monitor it, would it be, you had talked about there being economies of scale by doing two at the same time, whereas it seems like you're just splitting it in half. So is there would we save $100,000 by doing two at the same time? Or is it really, they're negligible, those economies of scale?
Director?
Yeah, through Mr. Chair to the counselor. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and it's something, we did consider with recommending two bridges initially. We were pretty comfortable in thinking if we tender both bridges, similar products, similar work, we were thinking about we could expect to see like an 8 to 10% savings in economies of scale. So the total original overall budget didn't envision that. That didn't envision economies of scale. But if you were to do them together, we would feel 8 to 10% you could expect in economies of scale.
Thank you very much. And a follow-up to that then too. So leaving the economies of scale outside of it, if we just go ahead with one and the other one we monitor and this winter it doesn't survive the winter, what are the costs involved in removing that completely?
Through Mr. Chair, to the counselor, if you have to just come in and remove the bridge, you're probably looking at maybe $25,000 to remove it.
Okay, thank you.
In that range.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Njima, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Reimer. So the question came up last time, I think it was Councillor Russell brought it up, that if that whole development was rebuilt today, would we put two bridges in? And so I'm going to ask that question again. I don't know if you can answer it, but
Yep.
I'm not sure that there's absolutely a need for two bridges. One nice wide bridge along there. It's a pedestrian bridge.
Yeah,
What is your
Dr.
opinion,
Graham?
I guess?
Yeah, for sure. Through Mr. Chair to the counselor, so, yeah, I think if we were doing this as a new development, normally our role in, representing the town's interests in future maintenance, we would try and minimize the number of bridges. So, I mean, they are in fairly close proximity. We would try and just put one bridge in.
I would think, and even in terms of need,
Right.
I can't think that it's a huge need to have one just at one end of the street and one end of the other. I mean, it'd be nice to have a bridge every 40 feet so anybody wouldn't have to walk too far to get across,
Right.
but practically speaking, I don't you know, and I hate to say that this is in my own ward, but that's a lot of money for a bridge. So I support the idea of replacing the one and holding off and seeing what we're going to do about the other, unless somebody wants to make a decision tonight not to replace the other. But I'm going to say I don't see any harm in holding off and looking at that bridge and keeping an eye on it over time. And I do have one more question.
Sorry, Counselor, no, my bad. Can Counselor Mikulik and Mary please jump out? That was my bad. I just had my finger here and I brushed it. Counselor Mikulik, can you please come out? And Counselor Najima, please come back in. You have to, yep, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the existing West Avenue Bridge, and you may have said this before, but in your opinion, how close is it to being dangerous and a liability for people that might use it in the interim?
Through Mr.
Director?
Chair to the councillor, so it's in very poor condition. We are ensuring it's in a, safe for people to use, or it would be closed. So we're doing our due diligence to make sure it's structurally safe for people to walk on, but it is in very poor condition. I mean, depending, how things go, it may have to get closed next year.
So that's your sort of, based on what you see next year, is
Yeah.
your safe?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, we're going to continue to monitor it, make sure it's okay for people to use, but
You think
I
it's
don't
good
think
for a
it's
year?
going to stay open, for a number of years for sure, like.
Okay. Yeah, my question was really just, is there, are we increasing the chance of anything happening badly by putting it off and just to keep the bridge there? But it doesn't sound like you believe that we are, so thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Mikulik, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Through you to Dave and maybe staff. There are people walking on this bridge every day, thankful that that bridge is there. They are probably worried, if they're watching, that both bridges may be closed at some point. At least one, perhaps. Can we investigate if somebody is willing to pay for the bridge or sponsor the bridge? I see a lot of bridges, and they seem to have names. Why they have names, it could be memorial bridges, it could be whatever, but I feel like there could be somebody with money that appreciates that bridge and walking on that bridge that may not mind having their name on or having the bridge named after them for some sort of sponsorship. Is there a possibility of us doing that?
Director Graham?
Yeah, through Mr. Chair to the councillor, I mean, I don't see why we can't look into that. I don't know, but we definitely can look at, if that is an option to help offset costs with sponsorships. I don't know, Mike, if you had something you'd like to.
Mr. CEO?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, I think it's a good option, Councillor. I would suggest, approve this evening, but direct us to go, look at those particular options, whether it's a memorial bridge, whether it's something like that. Can I say, it'll be easy? I don't know the answer to that. We do have a very philanthropic community, but at the same time, we do ask them for a lot of support for a lot of existing programs. But we can definitely take that as direction, that, we go out and we look at those types of things. Because even if we offset it by 50,000 or 100,000, that's still, that's still somewhat, absolutely.
No, when I walk by Charles Daly Park, I see boards are named after people, there's trees named after people. I don't think we build bridges very often, but maybe this could be a bridge that a local business in the area might be interested in sponsoring. And then one more question.
Go ahead, Counselor.
Probably to ECDev, with respect to this bridge, if we do approve this bridge, would it be possible to specifically reach out to local fabricators, welders, bridge builders, that might be interested in some sort of, I don't know how these things get tendered out. I don't know if it just gets tendered on a website for businesses to look into, but would it be possible for us to specifically reach out to fabricators and welders in the area? Because that, I feel, could save a lot of money, but I leave that to the staff.
Mr. CEO?
Through you, Chair. I mean, I leave it with us, Councillor, but I would suggest, I think it is a prefabricated bridge, and I think we do need to be following our procurement policy, but leave it to us maybe to reach out to, I think, some local businesses, definitely on the sponsorship side, and who they are, and I think, working within our procurement policy, we'll always do what we can, but I know Charlotte's probably over my shoulder telling me, follow the procurement policy, which we have to do. And Dave's telling me it's prefabricated, so it makes it tough to kind of, I think, piecemeal it out. But definitely hear the direction, whether you want to formalize it or not. I take the direction to go out there and see if we can find some sponsorship, whether it's small or large, for this particular bridge.
Thank you, Mike. Counselor?
Well, do you need a motion to formalize that, or can I just, with respect to the sponsorship?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the clerk's, it's Tamarack. So the clerk is working on some wording, Counselor,
Okay,
so.
sure.
In the meantime, maybe we'll go to additional questions, Chair.
We'll come back to that later, Counselor. Any other questions?
No.
Mayor Easton, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious to know whether by potentially eliminating one bridge, that we're asking children in particular to take a route for them to go further than they normally would. I want to know what the condition of that route is. Does it have a sidewalk on it? Would I have to walk on the road if I have to go down to quite a bit further to get to Tamarack? I guess it's about 2 blocks, I guess.
Director Graham?
Through you, Mr.
CEO.
Chair, I think we're just going to pull out the map.
Sure,
I think it's easier
yep.
to show on a map.
call.
It's about 300 meters in terms of distance. And absolutely, I think to the mayor's question, it is a change of habit. So people are going to have to get used to doing something different that they currently haven't been doing. And so there is that habit change that people have to go through. But Dave may have more he wants to add in terms of just site access, in terms of where it is and the condition of the trail that gets you there.
Thanks, Mike. Through you, Mr. Chair. So if you see on the top of the map there, that's the Tamarack Bridge. And that's the one that we're recommending is the priority bridge. It has a lot more connectivity links versus the West Avenue Bridge. But you can see on that map that, they are fairly close in proximity. So, if you're on, West Avenue, you can still walk up. There's a walkway, you can see it there on the right side of the creek that will bring you up to the other bridge. So you can get to the other bridge fairly easily. And same as on the other side, on the west side with Tamarack, you can walk, along Tamarack as well. But, respecting it would be a change if West Avenue did get closed. People who are used to using it, that would be an impact, and they would have to walk up to the Tamarack crossing.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, if I'm coming down from Stadelbauer and I get to West Avenue, what do I do if that bridge doesn't exist anymore? Where do I go?
Yeah, through Mr. Chair to Madam Mayor, so you could kind of continue north on West Avenue and see, I don't know if you can see it that easy. There's a sidewalk, a walkway there, just on the other side of the bulb, the crescent of West Avenue, and you can get to that.
Through the
There's a gate,
through the
right?
the arena.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I just want to point out that if I recall, when you were giving us the numbers on the traffic, I didn't think that there was a substantial difference. I mean, we weren't talking, I don't believe we were talking 50 counts. The point is that depending on how this stands up, and if I understood, I think in the report that you sent us, the most recent report, there was actually a reference being made to pedestrian traffic only on West Avenue in the interim. Is that correct?
Through
Director
Mr. Chair.
Graham?
Yeah, I can, while I have it here, I can, just summarize again the counts for everyone, just for information. So in July, we counted the Tamarack Bridge for 2 weeks, and we had an average of about 550 people per day crossing Tamarack. And West Avenue, we had about 280. per day. And then, in September,
That's quite a difference.
we counted it again for 2 weeks in September. Tamarack was about 510 people per day, and West Avenue was 185 people per day.
Okay, all right. Clearly, my memory isn't worth anything. So, yeah, that's pretty substantial. Okay, so let me go back then to the point of, would West Avenue, if West Avenue were kept open now, if you decided that you wanted to change the pattern there, would you recommend keeping that open for pedestrian traffic only?
Through Mr. Chair, so I think as long as it's safe, for sure, like, that's our intent, but if we have to close it, then we're gonna have to make a decision whether we're gonna replace it and have it open for people, and I think the question is, we can put a narrower bridge back if we wanna replace it to save some money. We don't have to put a real wide one back, or we could remove it.
Okay, so having a narrower bridge, which is what is there now, that's a consideration. I don't think we
Yep.
talked about that before. We talked about improving the standard overall, correct?
That's correct, through Mr. Chair. So when we initially brought this project to council for consideration, we were recommending to replace both bridges at wider bridges. And then after a lot of the discussion we had at our last budget meeting, we went back to say, okay, how could we make West Avenue more economical if we still want to replace West Avenue? And if we reduce West Avenue to kind of a narrower bridge to what it is today, we can save approximately 20% of the cost. So I think it drops it by about 100,000.
Okay, all right. I think that's a pretty good compromise overall. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor Easton. Councillor Mikulak? Just before we go to Councillor Najima, regarding the issue of sponsorship, you wish to make that a motion? Okay, we are going to put that up on the board right now. Please, Madam Clerk. The motion reads that committee directs staff to seek sponsorship opportunities for the replacement of Tamarack Avenue Pedestrian Bridge, Project 2024-25. Is that acceptable, Councillor Mikulak? Questions to the motion that we have on the floor? Questions, comments? Councillor Najima, is it to the motion?
No, it's not.
Okay,
Okay, let's vote.
okay. We'll vote on the motion.
The vote is now open. Counselor, you got it? I'm going to close that vote. And that carries, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Councillor Najima, new information or new questions?
Yes.
Regarding? Please go ahead.
Thank you. So as the appointee on the Joint Accessibility Advisory Committee, I have to ask when you scoped out the price of the bridge, did anything come up about the consideration for it being completely accessible? And I know when we think of accessibility, we think about just wheelchairs, walkers, that kind of thing, but there's other considerations that might come up too. Did any of that come up? And second question to that is, I'm assuming that if we move forward with the Tamarack Bridge, that we're going to have an accessibility consultant look at it and potentially make any recommendations for improvements.
Director Graham?
Yeah, through Mr. Chair, to the councillor, a great question. We have been in consultation with Donna Harrington and getting some of her input, because we're going through the detailed design process right now, and she didn't have any concerns. She gave some good feedback. I know one thing we definitely want to do, aside from the bridge, we want to fix up the approaches coming to the bridge, make those more accessible,
Yeah.
smoother. So we definitely will be, that's a high priority for us.
And not slippery
Exactly.
as well.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, perfect.
Thank you, Councillor. Moving on, project number 3. Project, 2019-32, Green Lane Phase 1A, debenture term. Are you pitching, Mike?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I am.
Please go ahead.
And the reason I'm pitching, to use your analogy, is because, for all intents and purposes, I think, council's understanding and recollection at the last meeting was that this was approved. The way the motion was written was slightly unclear. So really, we're coming back here really to provide clarification on that writing. And I suppose I'm in your hands should you have any other questions that weren't asked at that last particular meeting. But really, it's an administrative function, and that is why you have me in front of you this morning. Or sorry, this evening. I'm anticipating a long meeting.
Any
We're
questions?
just on item 3.
Any questions to number 3? From council? Seeing none? There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Russell. The committee receive and file for information report FN-20-24 regarding 2025 capital budget report backs. That committee acknowledged that the treasurer has updated the calculation of the town's annual repayment limit, ensuring the town is within the provincial limit, and that committee endorsed all capital projects approved for debenture, as they will have a useful economic life that is at least equal to the term of the debentures, and that committee recommends to council to approve the capital projects, including debt funding as outlined in Appendix B of the report. I'll now ask our clerk to open the vote.
The vote is now open. And I will close that vote. And that carries. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. We will now consider item 8.2, Report AD 10-24, Physician Recruitment Incentive Program. We have received several written submissions for this item, past the deadline for inclusion on the agenda, which has been circulated to members of committee for consideration. Written correspondence has been received from the following people on November the 12th, 2024. Yuri Hernane, Amanda McFarland, Laura Caldwell, Amber Morrison, Morgan Elferink, Kathleen Coughlin. We also received correspondence on November 13th, 2024 from Barb Woodcock and Amy Box. The Director of Economic Development and Communications will provide introductory comments to the report. Paul, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm still here. I wanted to introduce Paul and introduce our Jill Couteau, who's here from Niagara region in terms of physician recruitment. I will be going to sit down. This was a conversation. Paul's here presenting the report. He's authored the report, but I do want to highlight, bless you, that this was a long conversation at CLT. We were directed by council at a previous meeting to come back. I know there's been a lot of emails. There's been some clarification provided. So Paul's going to make some opening comments, and then definitely myself and others can answer any questions council may have. So I will turn it over to Mr. Deaney and go sit down now.
Please go ahead, Paul. Welcome, Jill.
Thank you, Mr. CEO and Chair, and Mike, thanks for introducing Jill. She's here to really bolster my healthcare knowledge and the knowledge of physician recruitment, so we appreciate her coming this evening. So thank you, Jill. So good evening, committee members. As Mike indicated, I am presenting report AD 1024, which outlines funding for a local physician incentive recruitment program here in the town of Lincoln. This proposed program is a response to a motion passed by council asking staff to investigate and report back during the 2025 budget process on a local physician recruitment program to help address the need for more family physicians in our community. According to data, Lincoln is short 4 family doctors, a shortage expected to grow as the population increases and existing physicians retire. The authorization that we are seeking tonight is the approval to use the $25,000 currently earmarked for the Niagara Benchlands Destination Development Fund and to hold it for a new recruitment program here in Lincoln. Should council approve of setting aside these funds, the next steps will be to come back in early 2025 with the guidelines and policy to implement a local physician recruitment program here in our community to help address the healthcare access gap for our residents. This report back in 2025 will lay out what the program will look like, providing some of those guidelines and policies for council's decision. Should council decide to move forward, at that point, then we will be implementing a physician recruitment program. That is not the decision on the table for tonight. Staff will also be investigating the opportunity to solicit private sector funds to bolster our levy contributions, while also looking at a multi-pronged approach and providing potential office space at BDSS, working closely with Jill and the region to promote Lincoln, as well as looking at housing opportunities at BDSS as part of that redevelopment plan. Staff believe this initiative aligns with council's strategic goal to promoting a healthy and safe community. We're also committed to monitoring the program's effectiveness over the next year, while with plans to bring forward any recommendations for adjustments, if needed, as part of the 2026 budget process. Of course, thank you for considering the report and its recommendations, and I do look forward to any questions. So Chair, back to you.
Thank you, Paul. Questions from council? Councilor Bernay, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Reimer. Through you to Mr. Deanne. So Paul, appreciate the report. I'm just wondering, for starters, so the recommendation is that, we direct staff to use the $25,000 that was committed to the Niagara Benchlands Development Fund. So that money was allocated to go there. So I'm wondering if you could, just for transparency, if you could talk about the groups that no longer, if this was to go and the money to be shifted, the groups that wouldn't have the opportunity to get that money. If you could just refresh my memory as to who those groups might be.
Yeah, I can do that. And through you, Chair, to
Go ahead,
the committee. I mean, so we've had the Destination Development Fund for the past 3 years, and we've had tourism-based operators that have applied for that fund. So that'd be local businesses that would be missing out on that grant funding opportunity. We did implement that fund 3 years ago as part of recovery according to, or as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, with the idea of trying to increase collaboration amongst our tourism partners. We did see some success with it, but obviously, we saw benefits, but of course, looking at the need in terms of physician recruitment, I think we went back and decided, okay, where we could better put these funds, and of course, the recommendation tonight is to hold that off for a physician recruitment program.
So just a follow-up question.
Go ahead, Councilor.
So that's great and very admirable. I'm just wondering, so in 2026, does this Niagara Benchland Development Fund get resurrected again, or is it closed?
So through you, Chair, I think at this point, Councillor, it would be on hold and pause. I did put in the report that we would look at potentially reviving it through municipal accommodation tax funding. But of course, that would be pending, the municipal accommodation tax bringing enough money to both cover DMO commitments, but also potentially the Destination Development Fund.
That's great. Thank you for that. Through you, Chair, do we have the opportunity to ask questions to Jill?
Go ahead.
If we could do one motion just to allow for an unregistered delegation, so moved by Councillor. An unregistered delegation, moved by Councillor Bernay to allow Jill Croteau to delegate. Just all in favor? That's great, thank you.
Are you okay to come up, Jill? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please go ahead, Councilor Bernay.
Thanks very much for being here. I've been following you on Instagram, and you've been busy over in Ireland. So I'm just wondering if you could comment. In the report, there's a chart, and in that chart, it lists 5 municipalities: Welland, Port Colborne, Fort Erie, Niagara Falls, and Niagara Lake. And it states that in 2024, there was quite a large number, 16 doctors recruited. 10 in Welland, and then the rest are listed there. Niagara Falls 4 and 1 and 1. Fort Erie didn't get anybody. So I'm just curious, those recruitments, how do they come about? Like, were they a direct result of your work as the Niagara Region recruitment person? Is it a combination of, these municipalities giving $100,000 to Doctors to Come? Or, like, I'm just trying to understand these numbers and how this success came to fruition.
So, through the chair.
Please go ahead, Jill.
It's a combination of factors. It ranges from being in contact with some of these candidates for a number of years, and then finally, the timing is right for them, just in terms of their licensing, immigration, where they're at with their careers, their family. So it goes as far as that. On the other side, it's supporting them once they may have connections to the community. They may have family in the area. They may have studied or trained at McMaster University, so they've got those connections to preceptors in the community. So it's working with them at various levels. It's also a collaborative effort, so working directly with the area municipalities in terms of the incentives that they potentially might offer. So I would say that it's a big range, but in all of those situations, I did have some sort of supportive impact on their relocation.
Okay. That's great. I'm just trying to understand your role and how, if we decide to go with an incentive program, how it all works together. So just a follow-up question.
Go ahead, Councilor Bernay.
So again, you were over in Ireland. I understand you were being supported by Fort Erie. Is that correct?
The town of Fort Erie did send a representative, and that's possible for anyone that wants to come with me on some of these events. This specifically was a repatriation event for the Irish medical schools. So there's 6 medical schools in Ireland. So those are Canadians or students that are in Niagara that want to reconnect and want to know the pathway back to Ontario to work.
So when you go, I'm just very curious and thinking, if we're going to make an investment, then what's our investment that goes along with it? So you go off to a place like Ireland or England or Scotland, wherever you go with someone from a neighboring, municipality in Niagara. There's a cost. There's obviously a cost to go overseas and meals and what is your, when you go over there, what is your anticipation, like what would success be after that is done? Are you bringing doctors back with you on the plane, or like what is the success? What is the matrix to a visit like that?
So there was a few,
Go ahead,
sorry,
Jill.
through the chair, there was a few different questions there, but I would think that, so I would determine success at a visit such as that. So with students, it's a little bit different. They're looking for observerships and educational opportunities so that they can build their resume to apply to the CARMS match so that they can get into potentially a family medicine residency program in Ontario, but likely if they're from Niagara, they would love to come back to Niagara. So that is a little bit different because you are looking to for educational opportunities. We did bring a physician with us to that event. Very helpful in having a physician talk to the students to let them know about opportunities in Niagara for education purposes. In other situations, I would say, for example, we were at an event in Birmingham in June. There was about 90 physicians, family physicians that were registered for the event. So capturing all of their information, making sure that they have all the information about immigration, about licensing, and tracking them along their stages. That would be a success for me if I could continue to be connected with them. And then having an opportunity to talk about Niagara and why that is a great place to live, work, play, relocate. So we have had successes. I wouldn't say that I would be bringing doctors back in a suitcase because it's a timely process. I would say it's between 8 to 18 months to recruit a physician because they're at various stages of their career. So it is a lengthy process. So it does take time to evaluate that.
That's great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jill, for being here. You were online for our last meeting, and you're here, and we appreciate that. And I ask those questions only because, you know, if we're going to make an investment, I need to know what your role is and what our investment is, you know, as we move forward. So thank you for the education on that. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you, Chair. I have a bunch of other questions, but I see the board's lit up, so I'll come back
Thank
in.
you for that,
Thank you.
Councilor Murray, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to just clarify something that you said, Jill, if I could. Do I understand that you're going to Ireland not to recruit foreign students, but you're going to Ireland to recruit Canadian students to come back to Canada? And so how actively are they being recruited elsewhere? Like, so do you have any idea what the percentage of Canadian students who study abroad, how many of them come back to Canada?
So through the chair,
Please go ahead, Jill.
it depends on the time of the CARMS match. So over the pandemic, the US match came before the Canadian match. So if they want a guaranteed spot in a residency program after they graduate medical school, they would need to apply to either one or the other. So Canada was a bit disadvantaged during that time. We do have this next cycle, Canada will come first. So if there are Irish medical students that are looking to study do their residency in Canada, they can apply to the CARMS match. There are additional spots being offered throughout the province. So that does increase their chances of it getting matched to a program here in Ontario. So I would say that their chances are better moving forward. So yes, it's not necessarily recruiting physicians back to Ontario. It would be connecting with the students and letting them know the educational opportunities.
Thank you very much. I asked that question because we talked last time we had a meeting about this topic. We talked about the systemic issues that we're facing here in Canada, and one of them appears to me to be the education system that doesn't allow Canadian students into Canadian universities to become Canadian doctors, but will allow those same Canadian students who were educated outside of Canada to come back in. So I feel like there's systemic issues that we cannot address here, but I do appreciate that part of this proposition is a continuation of advocacy efforts. So I appreciate that that's been wrapped into that, because I think that is something that we need to continue to address, that this is not a municipal issue that we can solve. So that was just a comment, and thank you very much, Jill, for that answer. And then, so Paul, if I could ask you a question about one of the things that you mentioned here is that ideally we're going to get this $25,000, and then we're going to look at alternative opportunities to incentivize them to come. And they could be coming from the private sector, and one of them might be that we could support in terms of housing and or office space. And you mentioned the BDSS site. And I just want to ask if we're not maybe putting the cart before the horse there, because my understanding that we haven't yet decided what's going to happen with BDSS. So that would create a presumption that we're going to make BDSS a healthcare center, which I don't think has been decided yet.
Yeah.
But is that fair?
So through you to,
Comments,
Chair,
Paul?
to the councillor, I mean, that's fair, councillor. I think what I've put in the report is that we'll look at the feasibility of the options on using BDSS. In addition, I also put 4996 Beam Street, which is currently our collaboration workspace, as an option as well, but you're right. I mean, no decisions have been made on that. So the opportunity, obviously, this evening is let's put some money behind an incentive recruitment program while looking at other opportunities that are non-financial in nature. In addition, your comment around the private sector is, as I indicated in the report, we're going to look at opportunities to maybe ask the private sector to help bolster our $25,000 to make it incentives a little bit larger, seeing if there's philanthropic businesses in our community that might want to join that effort.
Thank you very much. I feel like there's a theme tonight that we're going to ask the public to pay for lots of stuff, so interesting. And then just one further clarification, if I could, Chair.
Go right ahead.
So the $25,000, so my understanding is that's how much, that's the dollar value. So when we look at this chart that you provided of what other municipalities have provided, we're on the very low side, although Noddle also has 25 and they also got a doctor, so it's not necessarily the wrong number. So can I just want to make sure I understand, what we're saying is we're going to give you the budget to have $25,000 as a pool to offer, and if we don't get any results, at that point, then we're going to say, yeah, $25,000 is great, can we have another 25 for next year? Or 25,000 isn't nearly enough, we need to do something different. Is that what we're looking at?
Short answer, yes, councillor. I mean, I think looking at what other municipalities offer and in conversation with both the medical clinics in our community. We did have a roundtable discussion with the healthcare sector where this topic came up. I think probably, and I put it in the report, that we should be at a higher rate, but we're going to see what we can do with the 25,000. And if need be, as I stated in my comments, opening comments, come back in the budget process for 2026 with an increased ask, should we need it.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Murray. Vice Chair Russell, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to maybe Mr. Deanny, maybe our CAO, maybe Jill. At the last meeting when we had our delegation, I asked the doctor a question about the impacts of having a walk-in clinic versus having, again, going down this route and recruiting doctors. And again, the answer we got was, again, it costs them money, but I didn't want to push it because, again, there's obviously a little bit of a vested interest there. How do we find out, maybe as a bring back, again, what the parameters are to have a walk-in clinic, how they're run, the cost effectiveness of them? How do we get that information at the same time that we're making this decision to see which model might be the best way to go?
Mr. Deanny?
Yes, Chair, thank you. Through you to the councillor. I may start and turn it over to the CEO as well to answer some of the questions. But I think if I recall correctly, the doctor that was up here on the 15th of October, councillor, did talk about the level of care and quality of care between a walk-in clinic and a primary care physician. And so I think that's something that we've had a couple of conversations with the current clinic on in terms of what's currently out there and what does that look like. I think we can investigate a little bit further when we come back in Q1 of next year in terms of the policy and guidelines for our recruitment program. But maybe I can turn over to the CEO in terms of what he's hearing from the regional and provincial government on physician recruitment and primary care access.
Through you, Mr.
Go ahead,
Chair.
Mr. CEO.
So, Councillor, probably a lot to unpack in that question, and definitely something that we can bring back to council. So I don't want to, pretend I know all the answers to it. I think one of the things we heard was, the way billing occurs is a problem around walk-in clinics and why there isn't necessarily always support from family doctors and family health teams for walk-in clinics. And I think we can provide you a little bit more clarification. I see Jill nodding. She may also want to jump in on this because it's probably something she's hearing. I mean, definitely there's a shortage. We understand there's a shortage across the province, to Paul's comment around what we're hearing from the provincial government. It is one of those things that, is it necessarily the sole responsibility of municipalities? No, it's not. I think we understand that. However, to Mrs. Smith, whose granddaughter needs to see a doctor, they don't really look at jurisdiction and where that jurisdiction lies. Now, that's not to say we don't deal with a lot of issues like that. I think what we're suggesting here, and I will go back to kind of how this came about. Council directed us to go away and look at it. I can tell you, and it's no surprise to all of you who have read ahead in your budget documents, there's a number of priorities that you have, and there's a number of competing costs. And so what we said is there something we can do as a CLT where we support this program? I think incrementally. I always say, can we dip our toe into this particular item, this particular topic, but do it in a way that doesn't necessarily cost the taxpayer and where we're adding additional monies to that. Paul came to the table suggesting this fund and maybe potentially putting on hold, giving money out to various organizations on the tourism side and to address it here. That's why we're here in front of you. I think back to your question around what sort of information we have on walk-in clinics, we'll get you some of that, but I think the biggest issue is just the billing that occurs if someone walks into a clinic and has a family doctor or has another doctor. They're not then paid for it. And so I think, I see Jill nodding, my recollection of that is correct. But that's really, I think, the crux of why walk-in clinics necessarily aren't popping up everywhere. Now, there's a lot in a lot of communities because you have to fill the gap, you have to fill the shortage. And so I think people are looking at innovative or alternative ways to fill that gap. We've heard, proposals on more virtual triage and assessment centers. Some jurisdictions, the province has funded that. We do need to be advocating to the province. There is a roundtable, I think, in a week or two with all the CAOs and the mayors talking about physician recruitment. I think you're all going to hear from all of us. We want more support from the region, and sometimes more support means more money. And Jill's nodding and smiling to that, probably a good thing for her. But we all want more help. We want other levels to jump in here. It can't just be a municipal issue. Certain municipalities can have the ability to pay, certain don't. And then it creates that, I think, competitive nature that isn't always healthy in this particular case. So I think there's a lot of benefits to Lincoln and what Lincoln has to offer to a doctor. But at the end of the day, sometimes, we have learned incentivizing does help. And that's why we're in front of you. So that's my long answer to say it's a complex problem. We'll get back to you, but Jill may have more on walk-in clinics.
Go ahead, Jill.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the incentive piece in walk-in clinics, and just to confirm that there are no municipalities that fund or give incentives to physicians that are working piecemeal, like fee-for-service walk-in clinics. And the reason being, it really is it's a stopgap for not enough primary care. So it's really funding part of the not addressing the real problem, which is a lack of primary care physicians that are enrolling patients, that provide that consistency of care, and that can get you your referrals to specialists when needed. So when you do visit a walk-in clinic, oftentimes that information doesn't go back to your family doctor, and it's also a little more difficult to get specialty care. So it's not ideal. The ideal is to have a primary care provider, so I just wanted to add that piece in.
No, and I appreciate that, and one of the reasons I asked, and I know there's been a couple emails going back and forth about information that can be shared and whatnot, is that, again, just anecdotally, again, a lot of the visits that, to walk-ins or even to doctors are usually, they can be handled by either or. Like, it's not like, there should be a continuation of care. It's usually something acute, like a fever, something like that. And I'd love to see that data to see, okay, so how many require that extra step? And I just know it's not available readily, especially in the timeframe that we're looking at. But it was just a question to see if we could get like a proprietor of a walk-in clinic to give their side of how things work on, just for them, just for our information. It may not be something we want to investigate any further, but at least to have that base knowledge to be able to ask questions, I think it would be beneficial. And with that being said, Mr. Chair, I'm wondering, and again, Joe, you may be able to give some insight into this. Again, my wife's a teacher, but she plays a doctor in part-time using WebMD and things like that. And again, I've noticed just, again, in my lifetime with our children, like the way the care has changed. Like in the beginning, they got a fever, you call the doctor, you went in, or you went to a walk-in. Now it's you Google it, you get some insight, then you kind of determine, okay, so maybe 25% of the time you call a doctor, go in. With things like AI coming into fruition, and again, we are very, very early on into where that is going to mature into. Are we looking at a model that is going to be antiquated in a few years because a majority of these cases can be referred to something that we don't even realize with AI and how that can be handled? Any insight? I know that's a very broad and odd question, but it's just something that I was pondering while I was sitting here.
I don't think I can give any insight into that. I know that AI is currently being used for scribe purposes and to reduce some of the administrative burden, but I don't know if that person-to-person contact will ever go away. I think it's really important that you visit your family doctor and they set their eyes on you. Even, in a virtual call, there's certain things that can be missed. So as long as, so I guess that's all I can speak to about that.
Yeah, that's okay. That was a very, very broad question. Last question, this is very specific.
Go
Mr.
for
Chair,
it.
I know you're giving me some.
Go for it, VC.
Yeah.
You had a question there, it's all good.
Yeah. As far as restrictions, I know this was kind of mentioned at the last meeting, when somebody comes in and if they take over a practice, or if they're starting up new, can we put restrictions that if we are going to be funding this, that they are going to be taking Lincoln-only residents, or if they are non-Lincoln residents and they're taking over a practice, we have them pursue other endeavors, and then we backfill those with Lincoln residents to make sure that we are serving our community the best that we can.
Yeah, so through you, Chair, to the council, I've anecdotally asked this question to the clinics we have in our community council, and currently they only take Lincoln residents as new patients. So I think it's something that we could look at best practices in terms of some of the other guidelines and policies other municipalities use, and we can potentially recommend that.
And is there a possibility to?
Yeah.
Well, with the shortage of physicians, I don't know if you would want to do that. And considering the fact that if they are taking on neighboring community residents, they're still providing an economic impact to your community. So they're also paying rent in your community, they're paying taxes in your community. So if a portion of their practice is, maybe Grimsby people or people in St. Catharines or neighboring communities, there's still an advantage to the community. So just kind of keeping that in mind. I don't know if it would be best practice to fire a doctor at all, but it's definitely something, to consider with the policy, though.
No, I was thinking firing the patients, not the doctor.
Oh,
Like, remove, like, having, like, if they're
Yeah.
St. Catharines people, they can go find something more local, and then we serve ours with just Lincoln residents.
I don't know legally if they can do that. I think there has to be a justification, like a significant justification. It can't just be border.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Legally.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Patriva, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Reimer, and thank you for the report. Ladies, floor for me. Thanks for this report, and thanks for suggesting that Benchlands Fund, because having been on the adjudication committee for the last few years of that, I think this is a better spend for those dollars, right? We've got them up, we've got them running. At some point, they need to go on their own. Question with respect to the couple charts. So there's an A and a B chair in this. So it shows the Niagara, and maybe this is a question to Jill. Like, say Fort Erie, for instance, in '22 didn't recruit any physicians, got 2 last year, didn't get any this year. Were they actively recruiting, and they didn't come? In that case, they went to Port Colborne instead of Fort Erie? Yes?
Go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, so, sorry, through the chair, there's a variety of factors that go into this. A lot of it is clinic space and availability. It potentially could be spots within the faux group, which is the enrollment model that they're in. So there's certain restrictions, that we need to look at. When they come to me, though, they'll talk to me about what their personal preferences are. If it's a rural community, if it's an urban community, and then I help to direct. So if it is in Fort Erie and they're looking for a smaller town, there could be reasons why they're wanting close to the border. So the next neighboring communities would be potentially Niagara Falls or Port Colborne.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, terrific, thank you. And thanks for clarifying, too, that it was Canadian students going abroad and looking to come back, because my son's going to school in England, and I'm going, knowing the pound to dollar ratio and what I need to shell out for accommodations, even though he has a scholarship, I'm going, why would you leave? I mean, a pound is worth $2.81, I think, $2 for, like, why would you leave that? But it's the opportunity to come back. So my second question to that, Chair, do you think the changes that Premier Ford made a couple weeks ago about restricting access to medical schools here, opening up 2 new medical schools, will help the situation? And we're not going to see that for 4 years as the cycle goes through. Do you think that might have some positivity down the road?
It will, through the chair. I think that eventually it will, but we also have to keep in mind that the medical school spots and the residency spots are for all specialties. So when we look at that number, 740-something new residency spots across Ontario, not all those residency spots are for family medicine. So we just kind of have to keep that in mind.
Okay.
So yes, it will help, but I don't feel that it's going to solve the problem completely. Yeah.
And another question, if I may, Chair.
Go for it.
And I remember back to the roundtable that we had up at Beam Street, and Dr. Ken Southward, and we had heard this model at AMO, and was it Hastings, was it Renfrew? Right, about the call-in virtual, like something to get us, I don't want to say over the hump, but until we get the warm bodies here, is that something, to both of you, that we should be investigating? Because I know Dr. Ken was adamant about it, and I sat in on a couple sessions at AMO, and it works for them. And I know everyone should have a family doctor, and that's the panacea, and yeah, we're going to get there. But in the interim, is this something we should be investigating, short term?
So I think, Councillor, and through you, Chair, I mean, I think at that roundtable discussion, there was a lot of conversation around potential other healthcare models. I think it's something that, I think we could look at.
Okay.
But, obviously, as the physician mentioned on the 15th of October when they were here, and I mentioned it previously, about that quality of care versus in-person versus online. But Jill, I know you've been involved in some of the conversations, so do you want to chime in?
Yeah, no, and I think through the chair, it's definitely something that has worked in other areas. And I think that if there is a lack of primary care to the point where people are having trouble accessing it in remote communities, that might be the best option. I do know that they have had multiple conversations with other partners across Niagara, just because it does involve a paramedic EMS model. So I think that there is conversations going on about that in other areas. But again, I think that the goal would be to get more family doctors in, and I don't think we're too far off from that.
Okay.
So whether or not we want to consider that, it's,
Yeah,
I guess it
because,
would be-
yeah, and that's terrific. And, I mean, because it says that we're, 97 family doctors short in Niagara. So if we had a Niagara-wide approach of a virtual setting until we close that gap, we heard earlier tonight, we've got an infrastructure gap, we've got a family medical gap, there's a lot of gaps going on. But let's come up with a stopgap to close the gap, to say, hey, this is where we want to be, this is our plan to get there, but in the interim, let's use this.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor, for that comment, and I think my 96 number is even outdated already. Some Jill just whispered in my ear that we're at 106 lacking in Niagara. But I also want to point out, and I think this was mentioned on the 15th of October, the one clinic in question did mention a number of retirements that are coming down the pipeline. So this is about succession planning as well, and planning for the future, trying to stave off a primary care crisis in our community in regards to trying to bring more family physicians to fill the gap, but also plan for the future.
Well, and it's much like the blue or the gray wave we're experiencing in the building department, in building inspectors. Same thing. It's unfortunately that curve is coming in a lot of things as the baby boomers move through. The shortfalls of doctors, of optometrists, of dentists, of all of those professions, and there's been restrictions, and it's a systemic problem that now we need to finally address. And the fact that the province restricts what a family medical doctor can make. They cap them at $240,000. So
Counselor?
why would I do that rather than be an ASIS? Thanks, Chair.
You
I
got
just
it.
wanted to get that on there. Something
you.
we can't fix tonight, but let's do our part to help.
Mr. CEO, you had some comments?
No.
Sorry, my apology.
I apologize. My
apology.
mic's still on, you're right.
No, my apology.
I didn't assert myself.
No.
I could fix this.
Counselor Miklik, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Through you to Paul and Jill. I'm a little bit new to this, and I'm looking at the report, I'm looking at these charts, and, we're considering 25,000, and I look at what others are ponying up. So the question I have for Jill is, we've not met, and thank you for coming. You work for the region, so I'm curious, the region appointed you to be a recruitment officer for the region? So how does that work for you? And this is just a question that I think anybody would be wondering. Like, when you're going to a university or college and you're meeting with possible candidates, you're looking, and how is it possible for you to not say, well, Welland's offering $100,000. These others are offering nothing. So-and-so is offering 25, they're offering 40, they're offering this. Like, what does that look like for you when you're trying to negotiate or trying to convince? It seems like everyone would naturally go to Welland.
Are you comfortable answering that, Jill? Okay,
Yep,
please go
yep,
ahead.
Yep. I think it goes back to the process in speaking with them to find out what's important to them and addressing that first. So if they ask me about incentive in a certain, it really does boil down to community, whether or not they're looking for a more urban center, a rural center, whether or not they have friends, family in a certain area. So those things do factor into it as well. I think that the incentive would come into play if they were looking, a lot of the international physicians that I'm working with, it does become important because they're moving their family across the world So they're leaving, they're leaving practices that they're already at a certain level of earnings, so there's a certain risk associated with coming to the area. So for some candidates, it's an important factor, but not for everyone. So I do go through the questions with them, and if it is important to talk about incentive, then that's when it comes out.
Okay, I appreciate that. So, I just want to make sure it's not all about the money.
No.
Because 25 grand to 100 is not, if I'm full of debt, and this is why we're doing this, and, and I'm a student, and I'm looking at the money. And I ask that question because, like, you say you went to Ireland with a representative from Fort Erie. So that would lead me to believe that you're working for Fort Erie on that trip.
Actually, Fort Erie was working for the region on that trip.
Pardon me, sorry?
So Fort Erie was working for the region on that trip.
Okay.
Yeah. So she was assisting specifically at that event just because it was so busy the prior year. I needed someone to come with me because I couldn't man the booth by myself. There was 250 Canadians that were all very interested in speaking to me about Niagara, and oftentimes the lines were 5, 6, 7 deep, so people couldn't get an opportunity to even come and talk to me. So I needed the help. So that's why Fort Erie came with. But she spoke on behalf of Niagara. That was the pretense coming into that.
Okay.
Yeah, she wasn't
Thanks
representing.
for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Because,
Sorry.
all right, thank you. I wasn't sure if it was Fort Erie had appointed their own salesperson or recruiter or whatever, that sort of thing. So,
Yeah, so,
thank you.
sorry, just to clarify, Fort Erie they do have a health services representative that works for the town of Fort Erie, but she was there to help me represent the region.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Brunei, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Reimer. So I'm just trying to understand just exactly, what we're doing with this report. I think it's wonderful. To Councillor Pachariva's comment, a couple other councillors, I think we would all agree that, that every family deserves to have a family doctor. I think in principle, we would all agree that. I think anybody that would say that that is not accurate, as elected officials, would probably be political suicide. But the reality is there's 2.3 million people in this province, Ontario, that don't have a family doctor, and 4 point something in Canada. So, that certainly demonstrates this isn't unique to Lincoln. It's not unique to Niagara. So I'm just trying to understand, through you, Chair, the CAO mentioned we're dipping our toe into the water. So I'm trying to understand what that means. So we're taking 25,000 out of the bench lands, and we're going to demonstrate to the province, to the region, that Lincoln is understanding that we have a crisis. Because through you, Chair, I'm really trying to understand, where we go from this, beyond this 25,000. Because through you, Chair, to the CEO, if we were coming here tonight and saying that the data, Paul, to your point, the data is moving, it's already outdated. So, a group comes here and says we're going to be short 5. Somebody says, no, it's 8. So we're coming here tonight saying we need 800,000 to incentivize 8 doctors. What say you, Mr. CEO?
Go ahead, Mike.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think to maybe the second part of the councillor's question around the $800,000. I think if we were coming here and someone was saying we need to fund $800,000 for 8 doctors, would we be in the financial position to do that? My answer would be no. We wouldn't. I wouldn't be recommending to you setting up an account where we put that type of money aside. Short of council identifies this as your top priority and we take money away from something else. But at the end of the day, it becomes a trade-off conversation, becomes a priority conversation. But right now, if you're saying, could we afford to put $800,000 in an account to incentivize doctors? My answer would be absolutely not.
So through you, Chair, I really appreciate that comment because I think it's important that we know where we are, but where we're going. So I certainly, support the fact that we move this money in. We're moving it. We're not asking for a new ask. So I think that's important, and we're demonstrating that, we're serious about this. But my concern is as we move forward. So through you, Chair, I really hope that when we go to Roma in January, when we go to AMO in August, that this is front of mind and we're getting delegations in front of the ministry and anyone else to say this is an important issue, because I think that is where we can help. Beyond that, Chair, I would also like to ask our CEO through you, Chair, basically, what else can we do? We're talking about incentivizing here, but we also have commercial space. And I know that you've recently talked to Sam Osterhoff, our MPP, to get an understanding of what the provincial government is going to do about this. I believe you've also reached out to the new medical officer for the region. So I'm just wondering, what you're hearing in terms of what we can also do rather than just give a bag full of money in terms of office space, in terms of any of those other things, and what we can be doing through the Economic Development Office here in Lincoln.
The
Mr.
CEO,
Chair,
please go ahead.
I mean, I can definitely start it, and I'll look to my colleagues to jump in. I mean, in terms of your first question, I think related to my conversations with our MPP here in the community, I think what he's told a number of you, this is becoming increasingly a bigger priority across the province. I think as we head into a provincial election, you're going to hear a lot more about doctor shortages. I think some of the announcements we spoke about this evening around medical schools are a result of that, the appointment of Dr. Philpott, I think, to look at other potential options. I think the fact that we're having a roundtable, all the CAOs, all the mayors in a few weeks with Jill, with a number of other healthcare professionals around that table to talk about this issue, I think lends itself to the importance of the issue, and also lends itself that it's not just a financial conversation we need to have. Absolutely. I think that will be one of the conversations. About half the municipalities, give or take half the municipalities here in Niagara right now are in the incentive game. And so I think to a varying degree, as the report and the chart highlights. But it is one of those things that I think we're seeing more and more of. I did have conversations with our local medical officer of health, and we talked about everything from virtual triage and assessment and how that works and what is the approach to what are some of the challenges in setting up offices, in setting up clinics, and the kind of office manager role that is essential in a lot of these particular cases to setting it up, and how do we incentivize different groups. Some groups, like the one that came to present to us, already has an office manager in place. Their issue is a little bit different. To a new group of docs that are maybe looking for space and looking to set up an office, then the office manager becomes a critical role. I think we do have some opportunities around what I'll call municipal facilities or municipal sites we own. I think we should always be looking at how do we leverage those, how do we capitalize on those to address what are council's priorities around creating a healthy and well-being community. And I think as long as we're looking at those and maximizing what we can do with those sites, and they make good business decisions, then these things are important things for us to be doing. At the end of the day, I think, we want to come back in 2025. In the first quarter, we want to talk to you about what a policy around this looks like. There are other things. We're a beautiful community. We're close to the QEW. We're 45 minutes to an hour closer than Fort Erie. I know when I talk to my Fort Erie colleagues, they have an issue with recruitment on a whole bunch of fronts. And so I think, it is a different value proposition that Lincoln offers versus St. Catharines versus Fort Erie. And so I think we need to be doing all that. You mentioned Roma and AMO. Absolutely. I know Paul and I have already chatted about the importance of that advocacy. I suspect, should council want to pass a motion, other municipalities have passed motions that we share with other municipalities around the province coming to the table. Those are other things we can work with council on in terms of maybe some wording and that we share it with AMO. I do think this will heat up over the next number of months as elections come forward and as different levels of government see the importance of this and their role in this.
So through you, Chair, I just want to be very clear. I think this is a really, really important topic, and I think it's very serious. And we need to be looking at the future and looking at what these concerns are in terms of retirement and in terms of how many physicians we're going to be needing. But I also believe that there's many layers to this. And, to ask our taxpayers, to take on, 3-4% when we're sitting at the budget to incentivize doctors, talks about what our priorities are as we move forward and the burden that we're going to give to future councils moving forward. So I just want to be very clear. I'm very supportive of this report. However, if this report was stating that we're going to be doing this for a number of years and we're adding on, 100,000, 50,000, I'm out. I'm out right tonight because there's no plan here. But I look forward to the discussion moving forward, and I will be supportive of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And to the councillors' comments before about delegations at Roma and AMO, Mr. CEO, we can take that as staff?
It's in the report.
It's in the report? Awesome, thank you. Mayor Easton, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is quite a topic. I think if we expect to think that we're ever going to get to the bottom of it, we should just stop and give our heads a shake because it's not going to happen. It's just not possible. This problem has been in existence. Problems like this have been in existence for a long time. They are very difficult to solve. So it's what we know, but mostly it's what we don't know, and it's also what we don't understand. And I'll give you some example. We had one group practice come and speak to us. We have 2 major practices in town. Where is the other practice? What's their issue? Are they not dealing with the same problem? If they are, do they have another plan? Does that plan have merit? Why would it be working for them where it may potentially not be working for someone else? We don't know how physicians join practices. At one time, for those of us who live in Beamsville, who have always doctored in Grimsby, they had group practices, and you were always rostered in one form or another. Those physicians bought into the practice. It was a business arrangement. These are private businesses, but they're funded by the province. And so once the money changes hands, then what happens with it? How do they get paid? It's all their business, and we're not asking those questions. And it doesn't sound to me like we are going to be in a position to ask those questions, even though we're using public money. So I think that there are certainly things there that it may not even be necessary for us to know. It may turn out that the situation begins to change in another direction, and we're not going to find ourselves having to ask those questions. I don't know if we have any sole practitioners. Maybe, Mr. Chairman, through you to Jill, do we have any sole practitioners at all in Lincoln anymore? No. So that means that from Victoria Avenue on, we don't have any practitioners to service that part of our population. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right, but we don't know that, and I just know it because I know we're the last family doctor when he left, and nobody has been there on a full-time basis. That's a big concern here. So those people, our citizens, must be going somewhere for care, but we don't know that, and there isn't any way to find out, and it's quite logical that there is considerable ethics behind all of this. So you come down to the fact where you can ask, but you cannot get an answer to who are all the players and what are their roles. Because in many ways, this is private business. And so if we want to ask the question, all right, then who is accountable? There are many people that are accountable as well. I'm looking forward to this session that we're going to be having with the region. I'm very, very pleased that the chair has chosen to call this meeting so that we can get together. Some of the non-physician solutions aren't all to be just put aside. They may fill some very important gaps for us, and therefore there may be routes that we can take there. Remember, even if we do get physicians in the practices, are they going to work evenings? Are they going to work nights? If they don't work evenings and nights, then where is the coverage? What kind of care? We've spent X number of dollars, but we don't have that coverage. And it is correct. If you go to the emergency departments, which we're trying to avoid, sending people to the emergency department, there is no clawback on the fee that the province is paying to the family doctor. If you have rostered patients, you're paid a certain amount of money. If you don't look after your patients, then that money is clawed back. Now, the MPP that's looking after this now, Ms. Philpott, she's trying to get this changed. But it means that I either have to go to the emergency department and wait for a long time, or I have to go to a walk-in clinic. If I go to a walk-in clinic, the money is clawed back. If I do that more than once, then the family physician has the right, apparently, this is another, what do we know, what don't we know? They have the right to say, you're no longer on our roster, you're out. So it's very, very difficult for people, and it's just not possible for us, as Councillor Brunet said, this is an onion with a very big thing. So my question, Mr. Chairman, was
Thank you, Mayor.
around, just so that you don't feel that I'm running roughshod over you. It was about the sole practitioners, and thank you for answering it. But all I can say for myself, this $25,000 is an indication that we have a serious interest in the problem. It may not show it because it's not a huge amount of money, but we have expressed almost to a person that we have a serious interest in this problem. And we're going to continue, and I've been going to these meetings for over 2 years now. And there's a lot of solutions, but we need somebody to grab a hold of it. The region aren't going to do it without asking a lot of questions. We just spent millions and millions and millions on hospitals because the province wasn't taking up its own mandate. So we'll see where it takes us, but that's what we're voting on tonight. This is a serious consideration, and we're there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
So Chair, if I can just quickly add in.
Please go ahead, Paul.
All good comments, Madam Mayor, and one thing I do want to make clear for committee this evening is if we're to move forward with the incentive program, it's an agreement between the municipality and the doctor and the physician, not an agreement between the municipality and the clinic. And so I just wanted to make that clear this evening, but of course we'll be seeing that in the policy and guidelines in the new year.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very quick one, I hope. Again, I'm looking at the chart that shows the 5 municipalities from 2022 to 2024. About 32 or so doctors recruited. Are they all net new to Ontario?
Jill?
No. We do I have a more elaborate presentation for the roundtable event that talks about the distribution and where the candidates are coming from. I would say about 60% of the 27, 28 doctors that have come into Niagara are from outside of Canada. Yeah, so some of them are moving from Atlantic provinces, Manitoba, Alberta, but I would say that the majority of them are actually coming from the UK.
So then 40%, through you, Mr. Chair, 40% are Ontario doctors already, and they're moving from one municipality to another?
Outside of Niagara. So within, like GTA, other areas of Ontario, so I have it broken down. I don't have that in front of me, but I do have a slide to indicate or to illustrate where they're all coming from. And I don't have the numbers on the top of my head, sorry.
And that's okay. I was just, again, the question the root of the question was, are we incentivizing an issue in another municipality where we're taking a doctor from GTA where they also have the same shortage and we're bringing them here, paying them extra, and now we're causing a deficiency in another community in Ontario?
So most municipalities have a clause within their return of service contract that they can't accept an incentive within Niagara if they accept an incentive elsewhere. So that's to prevent people from moving from municipality to municipality. So there's no movement amongst doctors within Niagara, also within other areas of Ontario. So sometimes that does take effect. But I would say that if someone is moving out of Toronto and moving to Niagara, it's for lifestyle, but it's also, what I have been hearing is that it's slow to fill a practice in some of the GTA communities. So access to care might be a little bit different there than what it is here.
And I appreciate that, and just to follow up, like, I've got no issue with a doctor moving from GTA to Niagara on their own accord and setting up a practice, and again, reaping the benefits of a lower housing cost market, and again, just the general well-being of all Niagara residents, because we're great. I have an issue with us paying for them to come here on top of that. And again, I think that just causes an ethical dilemma where we're taking something from one of our own and bringing them here at their detriment and our betterment, and is, again, an ethical issue for me. Along those same lines, through you, Mr. Chair, the last question, has there been any, either in these municipalities or the other ones listed that have programs, have there been any requests from existing doctors for payment so they do not leave? So $100,000 to come in for a new doctor, but you pay me $50,000 and I won't leave.
Yeah, I don't think that has happened. That, most physicians understand that it's a supply and demand, and if there's a significant demand for doctors in a community, it's going to help the community. So by council passing, policies such as this, everyone understands that the reason that they're doing that is to increase capacity within their community for the residents. So I don't think that would be an issue.
Okay, good. And again, I appreciate that. And just last, not a question. Again, I, along Councillor Bernays' sentiment, like, I am fully in favor of going in and putting the 25,000 in and seeing where we are. I do have a lot of questions and concerns about any programs beyond that, and unless there are some severe restraints on ethics and what the actual capabilities are of recruiting people in, that discussed here a bit, but there's more to it than that. So, just my thoughts.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Timmers, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Reimer. I just want to thank you both, Jill, for being here tonight, and Paul. I do support this. I think it's a great compromise. Tonight, the decision is, that's what we're looking tonight. Are we supporting this? And I do support it. I think come January, New Year, we're going to have this entire discussion over, and that's when we can really delve into, and we'll be a lot more, hopefully more informed, and be able to make a clear decision of what we're going to do with this. But anyway, those are my comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I have a motion moved by Councillor Pachariva that committee receive and file report AD-10-24 regarding physician recruitment incentive program and approve a budget of $25,000 for a physician recruitment incentive program, and that committee directs staff to use the $25,000 Niagara Benchlands Development Fund to support this program, and that committee directs staff to come back in Q1 of 2025 with an authorizing bylaw and physician recruitment incentive policy for committee consideration, and that committee directs staff to monitor the success of the program in 2025 and come back with any recommended changes to the incentive program if needed as part of the 2026 budget process. I'll now ask our clerk to open the vote.
The vote is now open. Yeah. I will close that vote, and that carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jill. Make sure Paul takes you out for lunch or something. Because there you are. Great. Thank you very much. Before we move on, we are going to take a 10-minute break. We'll convene back here at 8:15. Thank you, everybody, for returning. We will now consider item 8.3, Report FN-18-24, 2025 Operating Budget Introduction. The CAO and Director of Finance will provide introductory comments. Mike, Charlotte, please go ahead. Charlotte, please go ahead.
Helps if I turn the microphone on. Thank you. It's good to be with you all tonight again to review the third phase of our budget, which is the operating introduction. So this evening, we'll be talking about where property taxes go, Town of Lincoln property taxes specifically, a little bit about property tax rates, some of the challenges that we're facing, the opportunities, and our operating budget key drivers. And then at the end, we'll review our budget schedule. So just to remind you about that as well, the deep dive into the departmental budgets will be occurring at our next budget meeting on the 25th. That's when, as the chair announced earlier, the rates and fees, the fees and charges bylaw will come forward, and we'll do that deep dive. So we wanted to do the introduction tonight. So this pie chart shows you that when we collect property taxes, the town collects on behalf of the region and the school boards, and then we take 52% of what we collect and we remit it to the region. And we take 11% of what we collect, we remit it to the school boards, and we keep 37%. And it's that 37% that we use here in the town to carry out all of our programs and services. So I know when people pay their property tax bill, they might not really be thinking about that, but in reality, we keep just over a third of the bill. The average household income in Lincoln in 2024 is $134,846. So the average home with an assessed value of $383,000 would pay $5,520 in property taxes. Now, I do want to just pause there for a minute because I know that it's very common that people look at that and say, that can't be the average. My house is worth way more than $383,000. However, that's based on MPAC's assessed value. And if you recall, the last time that the assessed values were updated, it was 2016. So if we can hearken back to those days and what a house was worth in 2016. Those 2016 values were phased in by MPAC from 2016 to 2020. And then when the pandemic happened, everything has been on hold since that time. And assessed values have been held constant unless there was a renovation, an improvement, or a construction to the property. So of that $5,520 of property tax that the average household would pay, the town of Lincoln would keep $2,060. So that's about 1.5% of household income. And the total bill is about 4.1% of the average household income. This is another way of looking. We have that coin graphic, which talks about, how many, basically it's like a percentage, how many pennies on the dollar. This breaks down the $2,060 to show that of that $2,060 that the average house pays, $433 goes for public works, like road maintenance, snow clearing, stormwater, environmental. $474 for community services like parks, arenas, museum, recreation and culture. $371 for capital projects and infrastructure. And I won't go through the whole pie chart, but those are the biggest items on that list. In 2023, if we look at property tax and water wastewater charges as a percent of household income, the town of Lincoln was 4.88%, which is below the average in Niagara. And so that's based on the BMA Management Consulting Report, which provides an estimate of what they call the municipal burden. So because each municipality charges their property taxes and their water and sewer a little bit differently, they look at it all combined. And Lincoln, as I said, was 4.88%, which is below the 5.23% average of municipalities in our region. And we're also in the mid-range of municipalities across Ontario. The town uses the property taxes and water and wastewater charges to deliver many services, such as the ones that we talked about earlier on that pie chart. So how are property taxes calculated? It's actually a pretty straightforward calculation, even though I know to some people municipal budgets seem like a conundrum to them. But we take our total expenditures for the year, we subtract all of our other revenue sources like user fees, grants, investment income, and then that net difference is the amount of property taxes that we need to collect for the year. So let's talk a bit about property tax rates. Property tax rates work very differently than many other taxes that our residents pay. And as I was preparing this presentation, I was thinking to myself, do people know what percentage increase they paid in HST last year? Like how much HST did they pay in 2023? How much HST have they paid in 2024, and what was the percentage change? Probably most people have no idea, right? Because the percentage stays the same. So even as inflation is occurring and the cost of goods is going up and the amount of HST that's charged on those goods goes up, the rate stays the same. And so people aren't necessarily thinking a lot about that, I would say. And so recent inflation means that more HST would be collected, but people might not be mindful of it. Property tax rates work differently because property tax rates are calculated after we've determined the amount of property tax that needs to be raised. So they change every year, as opposed to a tax like HST that stays at a constant rate. And because of that, it creates a focus on that percentage change that doesn't always occur with other types of taxes. So that's a reality that we contend with in municipal. Because our rates change, people are thinking a lot about how much those rates are changing. So average household income changes from year to year, and this is part of why we look at property taxes and other municipal costs as a percentage of household income rather than just looking at the costs themselves. So I took a look. This graph shows you the lower tier property tax as a percent of household income from 2019 to 2023. And for those if anyone who might be watching my thrilling presentation, lower tier means it excludes the region, it excludes the school boards, it's just the portion that we're keeping, or Port Colborne is keeping, or Fort Erie is keeping. So as property taxes have increased, household income has also increased. And as you can see from this graph, there has not been a significant change in the town of Lincoln's property tax as a percentage of household income. It was 1.33% of household income in 2019, and it's 1.43% in 2023. Lincoln's property taxes as a percentage of household income have been consistently below average in Niagara, the Niagara average being 1.7%. And if Lincoln's portion of the property tax bill were at the same level as the Niagara average, we would have about $350 more property tax per household every year. And as you know, we have about 10,000 households, more than 10,000. So some quick math tells you it makes quite a difference in the amount that we're raising each year compared to average. So this brings us to what are the challenges? What are the challenges for us as staff? What are the challenges for us in the finance department when we're working on compiling the budget? We're working on how to explain those things to people, and we're dealing with the pressures and the budget drivers that we face. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities estimates that municipalities are responsible for 60% of Canada's infrastructure, but only 10% of every tax dollar. Municipalities have limited ways to raise money apart from property tax. So, we heard the suggestions this evening. We're looking at things like, are there sponsorships? Are there memorial donations? How can we help offset the cost? But we have only so many tools at our disposal that we can use. Municipalities cannot incur debt for operations. We can only borrow for capital to a limit, and we need to manage that risk as well. And most municipalities have had an infrastructure gap that existed long before the pandemic, which we talked about as part of our capital budget. It was talked about earlier this evening. It's something we've shared before, a slide where you see the newspaper articles from across the country. This is something that finance professionals in municipalities across the province and across the nation are bringing to people's attention to help explain the need to invest more in our infrastructure. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other challenges that we're facing. Lincoln has been successful recently with application-based and project-specific grant funding, which is awesome. I'm super excited about it. We're very thankful about it. It makes a big difference. So for example, the recent Hughes funding we got for the Prudham's water main project was over $13 million, and it makes a huge impact. However, some of our ongoing and recurrent grants are either decreasing, unsteady, or increasing at a slower pace than the construction price index. This contributes to the growing infrastructure gap and puts additional pressure on property taxes and rates. So on the following slide, I'm going to show the cumulative impact over just the last few years compared to the construction price index of the Canada Community Building Fund, the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, and the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. So grants like the Hughes grant that we received for the Prudham's water main, they're like a one-time project specific. We apply for them, we get them. These ones are some of our ongoing regular grants that we anticipate for our capital program. OMF goes into our operating program. So what you can see, and I will give the disclaimer that the construction price index and the consumer indices are as of Q3 of the prior year, because I just wanted to show you, I have the grant amounts for 2025, but obviously we don't know what will happen to the construction index in 2025, but we're contending with it in terms of preparing our budgets. So during this period of time, the construction price index went up 28%. The consumer price index went up 18%. Our CCBF funding went up 12%. So while it's good that it increased at 12%, while the construction price index is going up 28%. And when that happens, that means the gap is still widening, right? OSIF funding during that time decreased 6% overall, and what you can see from the graph is sometimes like they go up, they go down, they go back up again. Your treasurer gets happy in the year when they go up, and then not so happy in the year when it goes down. And then the OMP funding has decreased by 11% during that time. So this is contributing to that infrastructure gap. When people say, why are the finance people talking about this? Why are we reading about this in the paper? Why are we talking about the infrastructure gap? Some of these things are part of the reason. So in terms of our capital funding needs, we wanted to do this little illustration and show it on a per municipality basis and a per household basis. Lincoln has a large network of road, water, wastewater, and storm infrastructure, as well as facilities, parks, equipment, and vehicles. We are geographically spaced out when it comes to our urban areas where growth can happen. This is therefore more expensive from an infrastructure perspective in terms of both upgrades and maintenance. And I think that's an important thing to talk about as well. So when people, even though I showed you the graph and I said, here's how we compare to other municipalities, we're also not entirely like them. Maybe they have a more dense population. Maybe their water and sewer mains don't need to extend over such a length of road. And all of those things affect how much it costs in order to maintain our infrastructure. The costs of maintaining and replacing these assets needs to be balanced between current and future users. So for the municipality as a whole, Lincoln has total assets at a cost of $311 million. And so what this means, if we divide it on a per household basis, the town's assets are about $29,000 per household. In order to replace those assets, it's estimated to cost us about $724 million. And on a per household basis, that's $68,150 worth of assets at their replacement value. So our current forecasted annual spend, now this includes tax levy, water, and sewer, is $16.5 million of what we're saying, this is what we need to be spending every year. That's $1,533 per household. Our current contribution is $6.3 million. So there's where you can see that gap. We've talked about it on the water side, on the wastewater side, on the tax levy side. This is combined together, but it just kind of gives a perspective on the scope. And that adds up to $596 per household. So what is the proposed increase? And to the point of the, the response I gave to Councillor Mikulik earlier in the evening, why would the treasurer say, I wouldn't decrease that $700,000? That wouldn't be my advice. So when we look at that gap, we're looking to increase the contribution by $700,000. That's $62 per household. So when we look at it in those terms, we understand the scope and the size and the amount of assets that we have per household, the total contribution that we need to be putting away, what it's going to cost us over time to replace and repair and rehabilitate those assets. That $62 is a little step in the right direction in order to start closing the gap. So we've shown this slide before. This is just isolated to the tax levy portion. And what you can see here is we've started to make progress. So in 2023, our transfer to the Infrastructure Reserve Fund was $1.3 million. In 2024, it's $1.7, and what we're proposing for 2025 is $2.5 million approximately. So we're putting more money towards our capital infrastructure, or as our CAO likes to say, more money in the bank, as he said it earlier. And it's important to reach a sustainable level regardless of how much is spent in 1 year. So that's the point I was sort of trying to share, is like, yes, we can defer, yes, we can make shifts from 1 year to the other, but at the end of the day, we still have an average amount that we're going to be spending each year and an average amount that we need to contribute each year towards it. So the proposed increase for the capital is $700,000, which is 3% on the Lincoln portion of the property tax bill. That's 1.11% of the total property tax bill, or $62 for the average residential household. And I'm going to, if I may, Chair, ask our CAO to come and were we going to open up, sorry.
That's okay, Charlotte, thank you. We will do questions first on this part of the report. So thank you, Charlotte, for that, for walking us through. If we have questions to Charlotte regarding her presentation, please go ahead. Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you to Charlotte. So Charlotte, what you've said is that we have been planning and projecting. That's the way we do business here. What we haven't been doing is stabilizing the money that needs to be in the bank against the gap. Is that right?
Through you, Chair, to the Councillor. In part, I mean, I think we've been doing what we need to be doing. I think what's happening is that the cost of everything has gone up at such a pace. Those grants are becoming unpredictable. We're also gaining better and better information, so all of the asset management planning legislation that came down from the province, I always say this, it came down from the province for a reason. It's not one municipality's issue, it's happening all over the place where they're asking us to gain better and more detailed information about what our assets are worth, how much they're going to cost to replace. So to your point, I think that's true, but I think it's more a case of all those factors coming together, more and better information, increasing costs, unpredictable grants are meaning that we need to do more than we may have originally anticipated.
Okay. So that's, through you, Mr. Chair, that's assuming that our taxpayers have the ability to pay. And I'm just trying to go back through the different steps that you took us through using the HST as the example of the stable tax. So it is somewhat easier for me to understand where you're taking us if I look at the 25 transfer to infrastructure reserve fund and compare that to the 13% or whatever that is, if we calculated that by a percentage, but I don't think it really matters. The point is, you're looking for an amount of money that reflects the variables, and that is the amount that reflects the variables. And through you, Mr. Chairman, and the variables will change annually. Do you agree with that?
Through you, Chair, yes. We're always updating. An asset management plan, a water wastewater financial plan, they're in many ways living documents. However, I think we have good data and we have good information over the course of time. We know what we've been spending historically. We know what's in our forecast. So it will change, but I think that it is reliable data. Even if it was 1 million, 2 million, higher or lower than we're saying, we still need to get up to that mark. We still have a ways to go. So I think we'll continue to refine it, but I think, the information that we have is also good.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, if I were looking at this amount, this is not all levy, correct? I'm looking at that
Go ahead,
2.47
Charlotte.
million. Is it all levy?
Through you, Chair, to the Mayor. Yes, that is the amount. So if you look in our operating budget and we have transfers to capital reserves, that 2.47 million is what we are recommending we transfer into the tax levy supported capital reserve fund in order to pay for all the things that we pay for from the tax levy. There is also a transfer from water and sewer, and I will be sharing that a bit more in my presentation in a couple of weeks, where if you look at those graphs in the water wastewater financial plan that BMA prepared for us, you can see there also the gap is starting to narrow. So we're tackling it on that side, and we're also trying to tackle it on the tax levy side.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor Easton. Councillor Mecklich, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Through you to Charlotte. So I've said it in the past where it frustrates me that, we're able to charge more or we're able to have a higher levy because, residents or households can afford it. I'm not sure if that's the best reason to increase taxes, but the question I have is, what about the business owners? What about commercial? What about industrial? Their tax rates, what are we hearing from them about property tax increases? Because, we're being told that households are able to afford it, but what about the business sector? What are we hearing from them?
Charlotte?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. The first thing I want to say is I'm trying to provide information to help bring context to the discussion and the percentage changes and what they mean and really where we're at as a municipality. It doesn't mean that we're not mindful of affordability for taxpayers or that I'm saying it doesn't matter. I just don't want that to be the impression that we're bringing. So I think we need to look at how we're comparing. Are we able to tax? Is it impacting how much we're raising? Is it impacting how much we're able to fund our capital? But I did just want to clarify that. In terms of the business community, I'm looking over at our Director of Economic Development and Communications. I'm not hearing a lot of complaints about property taxes, but I'm not sure if he has anything to add in that regard.
Go ahead, Director
Thank you,
Deanna.
Chair. Through you, and to add on to what our Director of Finance just indicated. So, Councillor, we have constant contact and communication with our businesses in our community, and while affordability does come up from time to time, In actuality, the biggest concern that we hear is lack of expansion space when it comes to industrial and more commercial space in our community. So while I've heard some anecdotal comments around it, Councillor, it's not top of mind. It's not the number one issue I hear most often.
Okay.
And sorry, Counselor, just to further that, Director Deany, at the roundtables we've had, I was only able to make one of them, but has that come up at all? At
No,
those
Councillor,
roundtables?
no, it hasn't, no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think that's good to hear, because that's good to hear if nobody's, no news is good news on that front. Another question I have is, is it possible that we're being made to look like the bad guys or the bad people because we haven't had impact property assessment increases that would typically generate more money for a municipality? If an assessment goes up, then that means, the taxes go up because of property value. And then we wouldn't need to increase our amount of, is that what's happening in the last few years?
Comments, Charlotte?
Through you, Chair, to the Councillor. So that is a commonly held belief, but the assessed values with MPAC, you might have heard me before refer to it as our piece of the pie. It determines how the taxes get distributed amongst the municipalities in the town, but not the total amount that's raised. And that's where, when we're talking about property tax rates and how they're different than HST, because we adjust them up or down based on how much we need to raise in a particular year, what the delayed assessment would mean is more, it could impact how things are being distributed amongst the properties. If, for example, one neighborhood, the market values are increasing at a faster pace than another, and there had been assessment updates that would impact their share of the property tax bill, but it doesn't really impact the total amount that we raise.
Okay, I wasn't sure, because in the budget binder, there's a line item where the taxes were written off because of MPAC assessments, or reassessments, let's say, so.
Through you, Chair, to the Councillor, those write-offs are based on appeals.
Yeah.
So if a property owner appeals something to do with their assessed value and they're successful in that appeal, that's outside of our hands. We actually then have to adjust their property tax bill based on the decision of the Assessment Review Board. But it is a little bit different than those assessment updates that occur when they are on that regular four-year assessment schedule.
Thank you very much. And then one more question quickly. Like,
Go ahead,
so
Councillor.
the regional portion that was mentioned, town portion, education, regional, is that the same, is that number or that percentage the same for all municipalities? And if not, how is that calculated?
So it would be the same for the same assessed value across municipalities. So if I have an assessed value of $383,000 in Lincoln, or of $383,000 in Niagara-on-the-Lake, I would pay the same amount of regional tax as long as I'm in the same tax class, like a residential class. The challenge with that, and the reason we give these other statistics through BMA, is that the same house doesn't necessarily cost the same in Niagara-on-the-Lake, in Lincoln, in Fort Erie, in Welland, in Port Colborne. So property values and market values from one municipality to the other can be different. So what BMA tries to do in their study is look at similar houses. And in that respect, the upper tier portion is not the same, because if you're a municipality such as Lincoln that has a higher than average assessed value, and the region's taxes are applied to that value, it means you would be paying a higher portion to the region.
Okay, and just to follow up, is that negotiable? Can we advocate, or can we negotiate with the region as far as what their portion is?
Through you, Chair, The region sets their tax rates just like we do, and it's legislated. So just like we take the total amount of property tax that we need to raise, and we divide it by the assessed values of the properties in our municipality to get a rate that we apply to each municipality, they do the same. It's just that they're doing it across the entire region. So they have their budget, they take the total amount they need to raise, they divide it up based on assessed value, and that's how it gets allocated to each property. The only exceptions would be certain special levies, like waste management and transit and things like that, that are a little bit more specific to the municipality.
So let's say through a hospital, would that be a special levy type thing?
Through you, Chair, to the counselor, I believe, I'm even looking at our deputy, I think the only special levies right now are transit and waste management. Yeah. So those are the only two that apply specifically to the municipalities. Beyond that, it's regional.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mikulak. We're going to ask our Mr. CAO to present the portion of this presentation regarding the former BDSS site. Please go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Chair. So through you, Chair, to members of council, a little bit of an introduction here. I don't think I need to take you through the history when we purchased it, the last time we were in front of you. At the end of the day, I think the comment I leave you with on that is the significance of the site in controlling our own destiny. I'm hearing from a few members of council, was it wise to purchase? Was it not wise to purchase? And I'll probably answer that further in the presentation. So if I do forget, please do remind me. I think we're in front of you now, really to talk to you about where we're at right now, what are the next steps, and what's it going to cost in the short term to continue to operate this site. I do plan on getting into a few things in terms of the building itself, who's in the building right now, what we have anticipated coming into the building in 2025. But just a reminder, we purchased the site for $2.85 million. That has been widely reported on and widely spoken about. The future plans for the site. Councilor Murray, I think, correctly said, nothing's been decided yet earlier on in the presentation about 3 hours ago when we were talking about another topic. There are future plans, and it will be a combination, at least the recommendation from staff right now seems to be leaning to a combination of public uses and private partnerships, looking for us to strike a balance. Will we maintain ownership of the entire site? I think right now, I'm leaning to the answer to that is no. What that looks like, I don't know, and it's important that we engage and continue to engage with the community, but at the same time, manage expectations and acknowledge the options that they're presenting to us, what we're hearing from various roundtables, various other levels of government, various agencies. Deloitte was engaged by the town to conduct a financial review to determine whether to buy BDSS. That was phase one of the BDSS or the Deloitte work. I'm often asked, well, where's the Deloitte report? Where's the Deloitte report, Mr. CAO? My answer to that is when we came forward to you on yes or no, go or no go, that was based on the financial analysis from Deloitte. And council will recall at that particular time, their advice, their direction, their financial analysis said at $2.85 million, absolutely move forward to it. The cost-benefit analysis and all the work that went into it showed it was a worthwhile investment. That detailed analysis include looking at strategic assessments of the site and surrounding areas, conducting a financial analysis of the site to determine the initial purchase, as I said, and then doing some market sounding with various market players, market stakeholders to develop recommendations and determine market interest. Is there market interest? Absolutely. But again, I think it's premature for me to come to you and say, keep it all, sell it all, or do something in between until we hear from the public. When we say we want to engage the public, we want to hear from the public, having predetermined options is not necessarily, I think, the best way to engage the public and actually truly hear them. So at the appropriate time, early in the new year, hopefully within the first quarter, I will be in front of you sharing what we're hearing from the public. I've given you a little bit of a precursor to that at various meetings when council has asked. Recently spoke to a number of the social service agencies. There was about 20 in the room. A lot of enthusiasm, a lot of interest. We've also been speaking and working with the current daycare provider that's there, that receives a significant amount of its funding from the region. We've been touring a number of private sector interests, and you'll hear a little bit more about that. We've been looking at Elections Canada and Elections Ontario, who want to use it as a potential hub when an election is called at both those levels. So we're also talking to Youth Studio, Niagara Industrial Association, and looking at a youth skills studio in that particular area, and there's some capital dollars coming. I'm probably getting a little in the details of what those conversations have been, but I want to leave council with the fact that there is a number of groups in this facility, and a number of groups is expressing interest. There's an environmental and site condition analysis under review. I will remind council we take ownership on January 1. As I said, Deloitte is on standby as we crystallize those recommendations to complete any remaining analysis. So some opportunities. We've toured the site, as I said, with a number of groups. We've begun those conversations. We've heard about seniors care, children's care. We've talked with CCWN, we've talked with Hamilton Health Sciences, as well as a number of local businesses. We've heard about recreational amenities. We have 2 gyms that are functioning there. We've heard about continued basketball, run more summer camps. We've heard about pickleball, and pickleball again and again. We've heard about the housing needs, affordable housing, seniors housing. Just today I had a conversation around affordable housing and what that looks like on this particular site. Parking, the need for green space. Obviously the daycare. We have children in our community and they need a place to receive daycare. As you can see on the presentation, we have had conversations and will likely be moving forward with allowing the daycare to take over the 2nd floor with further plans for expansions. I think I've reported to council a number of times. They've got their own capital stream of money coming from the region, but they've also got their own reserve that they've set aside to conduct a lot of this work. Regional Public Health Services is expressing potential interest in a West Niagara hub, and that is not to suggest that this becomes a healthcare hub, but there isn't what I would call the general social and public health services anywhere in West Niagara. And so they've expressed an interest in terms of touchdown space, in terms of spaces where they can do vaccine clinics and so forth. So the operating budget that's in front of you, that you've got here, that you've got in your book, looks like this. We've identified some funding sources. So these are user fees and service charges. And you can see at the bottom what those anticipated revenues include. About $100,000 from camp revenues. We often hear we run great camps, but they fill really quickly. I heard just the other day, people get up early, people are logging on, people are registering for camps, and if you're not one of the first, you're usually not successful. We're looking at a little over $200,000 in film, rental, and other miscellaneous recoveries. So we've toured some film groups that want to use parts of the classrooms and the old library to shoot some movies. Director Deanne's given me a little bit of a heads up. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to share which movie, but he can answer that question should council have questions. Obviously, there's personnel costs for camp staff that will be offset by that $100,000 in revenues. So the net cost is $22,000 for us to run additional camps. There is some repairs and maintenance. The site has been empty a bit. There has been a custodian that is at that site regularly. The gymnasium is used and rented by basketball groups almost on a daily basis. So you see in here, there's some repairs and maintenance. We are looking to include in this budget some janitorial and ground maintenance, and some additional money for us to do the work that's required to move this project forward. Council knows this is a capital loan, a floating capital loan that was used to fund the project, and it is interest-only payments at this particular point in time. You can see the net levy requirements are about $440,800. And so you're asking me probably, or you're thinking, well, how did you come up with janitorial costs, or how did you come up with other costs around heat, hydro, all those sorts of things? You see the utilities being the major driver there. Those are all numbers that we've looked at and received from the DSBN in terms of what it costed them to operate and keep the facility functioning, and you see those contained within this particular budget. So what's $441,000 this year mean? And maybe I'll preface it before I go forward to suggest I don't anticipate being in a position like this for more than a year. We need to have a decision made in 2025 on this site. How much are we keeping? What are we not keeping? How much are we selling? And what are our plans? I think the community expects that of us. I think council expects that of us. And I think as we look at partners that are in this facility and will want to be in this facility, they need to know that. So this year we are asking for what the equivalent of 1.8% on Lincoln's portion. And that's the portion we control. That is approximately 0.7% on the total property tax bill. And I say the total property tax bill because that's what the resident sees. So that is approximately, as you can see, the calculation finance staff has done here, $37 for the average residential household based on the current assessment. Obviously, most homes are more than that. So I think if you were to multiply that by at least 2 or 3, you can see what the impact is. But we are looking at 1.8% on Lincoln's portion for the BDSS site. I do believe, when you look at a $20 million asset, and I just based that on land costs, this is a small investment at this particular point in time. And our goal with any sale is to ensure not only do we pay the loan off, but we also pay back any of the additional costs that we have. And so, that's always our goal. Residents shouldn't, while it's a priority, I think residents would expect anything we're taking or anything we're utilizing or anything we're funding for the site is paid back when we look at the ultimate potential sale of part of the property or the ultimate potential use or partnership, whether that be through senior levels of government or otherwise. I think these are Charlotte's slides here that talk to you a little bit about budget key drivers. I can quickly go through those on Charlotte's behalf. I think you've seen a lot of these key drivers around legal and regulatory, our fixed and variable costs, obviously inflation, service delivery, what it costs to deliver service. On a number of occasions, you've asked me about services and the level of service we provide. Those are all things we look at. Those are all things we take into consideration, and that ranges from everything from Christmas decorations to the way we cut grass to the way we clean snow. Compensation, obviously, a large driver that you're going to hear more about on November 25th, as you will about all of these. What we pay people, our collective agreements, and those sorts of things. I've definitely heard from a couple members of council who have read forward in their budget books that they've got some questions, and as always, should council want some sort of in-camera type conversation relative to compensation or relative to anything that is identifiable that would take us in camera, then I'm always willing to have those conversations. And of course, our operating budget key drivers. Our last one on here being grant funding, and I think Charlotte's shared with you. We've had a lot of successes, but it is one of those things we can't necessarily budget for. We've done a great job. We'll continue to do a great job, but it is one of those things that's unpredictable. Technology, obviously, the capital funding needs. I continue to say putting money in the bank's a good idea, but yes, there's a cost to putting money in the bank. Your budget schedule is here. in terms of where we're at right now. We are in the informed debate approved stage and look forward to sharing more with you in a few weeks as we delve into operating. So I will take us back to the BDSS site and any questions council may have or any further information you would want us potentially to bring back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Questions to the BDSS presentation? Councillor Bernay, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Reimer. So, Mr. CEO, thanks for the presentation. I guess there's a number of ways that you can present this, and certainly, you know, in the way you presented, you know, it continues to look like, you know, this is the right thing to do to move forward with this purchase. But when I look at this slide, you know, I have some serious concerns. I mean, the expenditures, and I think you said the clock starts January the 1st. So $755,800 is 27% of what we paid for this property. Think about that for a second.
Yep.
27% of what we paid is our expenditure for the first year. So I think you're absolutely on the mark, and I hope when we see the Deloitte report that it indicates this, that we don't have a lot of time. Like, we need to get on this quickly. So I guess through you, Chair, to the CAO, you know, we're projecting, and, you know, and the budget binder talks and expands on some of these things in terms of user fees and where we're going to get this money, $98,000 in camp revenues and $217,000 in film and rental and other miscellaneous recoveries. But what happens if those don't come to fruition? So it's not 440, it's 755. So I just want to be.
Through you, Mr. Chair, maybe to the councillor. Councillor, you know, one of the things that I've learned is to ensure that any numbers relative to revenue are incredibly conservative. I would tell you that what we've got here doesn't include the increased rent from the daycare. It doesn't. What it does include, again, are very conservative estimates around film revenue, which I know Director Deanne's working on an agreement with, and that's pretty firm. And the two conversations and draft agreements that we've got with both Elections Canada and Elections Ontario. So do I think we can hit the 217,000? Absolutely. I suspect, and our goal is always to exceed these targets. These are very, very conservative targets, and I think that was one of the things that the conversation around the corporate leadership team was. I think both Paul and Charlotte were advocating that it's best to be conservative with these estimates, because I think we've heard around this table, if we're going to put revenue estimates, if we're going to put those projections in, make sure you can reach them. The camp revenue is based on our current camp programming, and you know, Director McKay has reaffirmed the 98K again is a very conservative estimate. So you're right that the 440 is 27%, nearly a quarter of what we bought the site for, and I think that's a good point, and it's one why I said to you, I don't want to be here with you having this conversation again, because we haven't made a decision and we haven't decided what we're doing with the entire site. We need to make sure anything we do with this site takes into account the finances of this site. I think there's an expectation from the public as well as council, but I do want to give the public an opportunity, and council, I think, to hear what they want to do there. I can tell you intuitively what we've presented. We did a sort of dotmocracy exercise at a number of the roundtables. I think people understand we can't keep the entire site, but no one wants to sell the entire site off either. And so it will be some hybrid that I think takes into consideration the costs, but also takes into consideration how do we create a legacy on this site and maybe address some of those community issues that we've heard about.
So Chair Reimer, thank you very much for that opportunity to ask this question. I appreciate the CAO and his confidence in, you know, the fact that these are conservative numbers and that we are going to, you know, bring that funding source revenue in to kind of offset some of these expenditures. So I really appreciate that confidence. Through you, Chair, I'm wondering if the CAO could comment It's great that we're going into these community engagements, and we're going to hear from a lot of different organizations on what they feel they'd like to see, in terms of maybe a community hub, et cetera, et cetera. But certainly over the time, where we weren't able to publicly announce that we had actually purchased this from the DSBN, there was a lot of comments in the community about this facility here and the possibility that Town Hall might be moving to the BDSS site. As we sit here now, coming to the end of 2024 and the clock ticking on January the 1st, I'm wondering if you could talk about that as the CEO of the municipality of Lincoln.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the question, Councillor, and it's the same question I get at each one of these sessions, because I think that was talked about. I think, if I take members of council back to when that was talked about, I think 5 or 6 years ago, the reason it was talked about, we were going through our capital planning efforts, we were looking at our 10-year capital plan, and we were looking at what sort of work does this site need. It is a rather old site. It hasn't had a significant amount of investment, and we do have things like the roof and HVAC that are reaching their end of life. And so I think at that particular time, when the idea was floated, do we look at potentially moving some of the administrative functions away from this building and moving them into another site? We do own a lot of sites for a various number of reasons. I think what probably wasn't clear at that particular point in time was we were never really talking about moving the operations. It was more moving some of the administrative functions. However, what I do tell people is that isn't a decision that is at the top of the priority list relative to what we want to do with this site. It absolutely isn't. I think it's incumbent upon us to look at what are the needs here and at all of our facilities, and how do we make the best use of where people are. We have heard from various local businesses, the Chamber, the BIA, having a few more people out of that building who are frequenting downtown restaurants is a good thing, but I can tell members of council that moving folks from Town Hall likely isn't happening anytime soon. Now, this is an industrial zone property, or it's in an industrial corridor. If someone was to come to us, and we often do get people looking for industrial land, and this fits the bill, it's on the QEW, and they provide us I think an offer that I need to bring to you because it's a great offer, that may change the conversation that we're having. But at the end of the day, it is going to come down to the economics of it, and I would suggest to you the economics of it at this particular point in time are that Town Hall currently stay in this site.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Reimer. So just my third question.
Go ahead.
So through you to the CEO, Mike, I'm just wondering if you could maybe just give some clarification or expand. There's a bullet point on slide 18 that states the environmental and site condition analysis is under review. I'm wondering if you could just kind of let us know exactly what that means.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when we purchased the site, we received, I think, what I would call more of the high-level details around the site, the location, what the building was constructed with, age of the building, and those sorts of things. And what we're doing now is really delving a lot deeper into that. I would tell you, and one of the things I think when you asked me the other day on this site, if you had asked me the question a number of years ago, but a number of months ago, I probably would have told you the current site would not remain intact, and we would likely be demolishing part of it and constructing new. I think the longer I'm in the site, the longer I'm looking at the site, the longer we look at the analysis and the economics of it. I think the more we lean to probably doing some renovations of the site and to using, the existing buildings, or at least a large number of them. And so if we're going to do that, making sure we know what's in the site, making sure we know what any sort of remediation, if we're to start opening walls and so forth, council will know, or those that have gone to the school will know, but most schools don't have AC. So looking at the HVAC needs on that particular site, again, if we're starting to open up things, when you've got a site, especially some of the wings that are a little bit older, that will go into our decision-making in terms of, what's kept, what's not kept. So I think for us, we just want to make sure we've got all the information, all the data, before we start having those types of conversations, especially when we look at, again, we have a user group in there that is looking to expand on the second floor and looking to take over almost that entire second wing because of the need.
Thank you, Chair Reimer.
Councillor Njema, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Reimer. Thank you for presentation about BDSS. So we talked about there being time is of the essence in terms of getting things moving along and recouping our capital investment and minimizing our operating expenses. So the property is 12 and a half acres approximately. So at times we've talked about working with others, potentially selling off portions of the property. And I know that we are in the process of reviewing our official plan in-house. Is that part of what we're looking at as part of our official plan, the land use on that property? And how far along on that process are we? So how prepared are we going to be in the near future to reach out to others and talk about potentially selling off portions of the property for example, residential uses?
Go ahead, Mr. CEO.
So I'll give Director Bruder, I'm hoping he's still online somewhere. Steve, maybe get rid of this screen, maybe we'll bring Matt up to answer I think some of the planning conversations. But just a couple of points, Councillor. You raised the size of the site, closer to 15 acres in terms of what we've got on that site. Your other question, I think, was around some of the planning work that's happening. Right now, we're going through the conversations around engagement and around hearing what people want on the site. Absolutely. There is a planning element to this. There is a land use element to this. And I think I received a question from a member of council earlier that talked about staffing as it relates to this particular site. And I think the way I answered that question, maybe I'll reiterate for all members of council, and that is the way we're trying to tackle this is looking at some cross-functional teams. Council will recall, we did do a slight reorg where certain functions were pulled into my office. I think about Walter and the project team. We also created some capacity for Director McKay, who also is very familiar and understands project management, to take on some of this work as well. Obviously, Director Bruder, in terms of just the lion's share of this as we move forward, being planning, and currently, if we think about what's happening right now, Director Deanne's taken a lot of the role in terms of communication and engagement. So cross-functional teams is how we've always dealt with things in the community and in the organization. It is about pulling, I think, different strengths together around that table. I think about cannabis. I think about prudums. That's how we've always tackled these things. And so, I wanted to answer that particular piece around the staffing because I was asked it earlier. But Matt, maybe speak to kind of the land use conversations around that site. But I do want to reiterate, Council, absolutely, we anticipate within 2025 being in a position as much or as best we can to engage the private sector in those conversations as you referenced. I'm trying to be careful over how much I say and how much we share publicly because some of it is still subject to confidentiality, but we absolutely in 2025 want to start having those conversations. I am reminded every time I say we may sell part of that we have one chance to do something incredible here. And don't forget that legacy piece of it. And I know there's a lot of passion in the community around that. And we are very cognizant of that, both as staff. I know council's cognizant of that. So it is about finding that happy medium and that balance. But Matt, maybe you want to chime in.
Go ahead, Matt.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, from an official plan point of view, it's a good question for sure. But, as we started on that process, a lot of it was looking at some policy updates that we have to do, aligning ourselves with the new Niagara official plan. There was all of that going on, and that's how it started. As our CAO mentioned, I think we're still going through options. We're, going through some forms of early engagement. It was a little bit premature to include what we want to what we want to do or what we might want to do in the official plan, because, you know, we're not quite there yet in determining, okay, what part of the land is going to be used for what per se. I think there's a few ideas. That said, our official plan, we haven't quite gone through the process yet of finalizing all the updates. We're almost there, but there's a few wrinkles to get through, probably the topic of another discussion. So it's something we can continue to evaluate. But as we were going through, this was kind of considered a little bit separate, almost like maybe a separate master planning or secondary plan exercise. Perhaps, we're not quite sure yet. Again, it depends on how everything shakes out with the land. But good question. Certainly understand why you asked it, Councillor.
I mean, the timing is good, actually, if you think about it, if the official plan isn't completed, because if there's going to be discussions about potentially purchasing part of this property, private sector reaching out, they may want to be part of the conversation and reach out and say, this is what I want to do with this property, what do you think? And rather than having to jump back into the official plan and have another look at it, the timing is actually pretty good. Thank you.
Mayor Easton, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. The first one is on the issue of managing risks, and I'm certainly not, I don't want to minimize the risk question. However, I also want to see the balance of how risk is going to be managed. And so we have a very, very strong track record when it comes to grants, and I know that we always say, but we wouldn't rely on them, and that's a fair statement. But there's an exponential part of this that's so repetitive that I don't think it's responsible if we don't figure out exponentially, do that smoothing exercise to find out where, if we continue on doing the same things, do we have the same level of skill set within the organization? If we do, where are the strengths in those individuals? What can we bring to the question of managing risk? And not just in terms of finances, but available space, those resources that are highly sought after by the public, but for some reason or other, they don't end up being high on the priority list. How do we plan to manage that element of the business case?
CEO, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think to the mayor's, comment, there's a couple of parts in there, and, I think she spoke a little bit about grants, and, as much as we say we can't count on them, what are we doing around grants? So maybe I'll tackle that part first, and then I'll move to kind of managing risk. I mean, we've already started to have those conversations, as I think I highlighted with you. We had the Niagara Industrial Association in there. We talked about skilled trades. We talked about some government grants, specifically around capital, that we may want to pursue. I would also add, I think there's a number of recent announcements that have been made. Community hubs in the past have been funded, Mayor Easton, and I think we've toured a few, and they received government funding. So I think the way we look at funding will need to be an amalgam of a few things. The regional piece, in terms of not just making space available, but is there a funding stream that comes with the region? I think I've shared with you, the daycare has a funding stream with it that is funded and supported by the region. We recently met with the Director of Senior Services from the region, who had also expressed an interest in potentially looking at this site and with it coming monies. And similarly, Hamilton Health Sciences. We know there's a new hospital being built. We also know that that new hospital is going to be busting at the seams, and there's things better done in the community to service residents across West Niagara that are going to be at that site. And so I think looking at the potential opportunities with an organization like a hospital and making asks of senior levels of government where we're bringing numerous partners to the table make our chances of success better. How are we going to manage risk? I think risk is one of those things. Typically people think risk, they think finance. They don't think risk and associated to other things. But you and I were in a meeting the other day where we talked about just, there's more than finance when we look at risk. There's more than those particular items. It is an important part of what we do, and I think at the end of the day, we're judged on the financial piece of it, but there is those other risks. Is there a risk in potentially not listening to our community and not delivering on all the things they want here. Sure there is. I think that's why it's going to require us bringing a whole bunch of disparate thoughts together, and I think coming to you with an analysis that is both qualitative and quantitative, so that we can get to a point where council feels comfortable making a decision. Obviously the financial piece, and I feel like I keep harping on the financial piece, but the financial piece will be a key element. We need to make sure we're sustainable, and when we talk about sustainability, there's both the non-financial elements to it, but the financial elements to it. And so where we're at right now, I would suggest to you, we're going to continue to look at the risk. The more data we have, the more our risk tolerance becomes informed, either up or down. Usually more data means that risk tolerance probably increases, and we feel more comfortable because with data we can be a little bit more specific, we can be a little bit more deliberate in our decisions. And so I think as we come back, one of the things maybe we'll come back and present to you on is a little bit of a risk matrix in terms of the site, in terms of things that are known and unknown.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I think that would be wise. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have this conversation that's exclusively financial in nature, which has to be foremost, no question about it. But if we don't find a place to deliberately include these other elements, then I think the report will not be as balanced as it should be. It certainly won't be complete. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to maybe one final point on that. I can tell you that the community and residents are holding our feet to the fire on both the financial piece of it, but I would suggest to you also the non-financial piece of it. A number of residents that I enjoy both banter and philosophical conversations with are also the ones telling us, look at the site, look at it differently. This is different than other capital projects. You have one chance to do something well here. So I think even those that are very focused on the financial piece also see that we need to look at some of these other pieces as well.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Easton. Councillor Mikulik, please go
Thank you
ahead.
very much. Through you to our CAO. So when Councillor Brunet brought up the operating cost currently as a percentage of the purchase, that kind of made me think twice, like, wow, I'm thinking it's high, it appears high, but it might be artificially appearing high because we did get a pretty favorable price for it. So I don't feel too bad about that. But when we're talking about operations and it seems like we're going to be getting into the business of being landlords. I'm not sure what sort of expertise we have in that area, but are we targeting for this property, if we're becoming landlords, for it to net us revenue, to be revenue positive? Are we hoping for that?
To you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. Councillor, I think everything we do, I would love to be revenue neutral or revenue positive. You've often heard me say, and I see some members of council smiling because you've heard me say before, the business that municipalities are in isn't always one that generates us revenue or makes us revenue positive or even revenue neutral. We provide services and value for service. And the currency we deal with is more about public trust and confidence in service delivery. And people will say, well, that's just, the CAO, talking about theory. It isn't, because I think if I look at a number of the services we provide, from libraries to the provision of ice, those aren't things that break even for us. The question would be, should they? I think you could have people that would argue on both sides, maybe yes, maybe no. We are in the business of providing services, but in terms of this particular project, so I preface it by saying that, if we can generate more revenue than it costs us to operate it, that's absolutely the goal. We will continue. These are very conservative estimates, and we will continue to ensure that we are exploring every option, every possibility to either be neutral or very close to it. Do I think we can get there? Again, I don't want to promise you that I can and not deliver, but this facility does have the opportunity to yield us significant amounts of revenue, and I think we need to look at that. We need to look at our programming. We need to look at everything from pickleball to what we just generally charge people for things, and those are the things we've had conversations on and will continue to have conversations on.
Thank you very much. And I asked that question because, like, it's a lot of space of all sorts, all types, and I just want to make sure that we're not competing or we're, artificially lowering the value of it to be good sports in the community, but meanwhile, there's commercial space that's vacant that people are complaining I can't compete with the town because they're offering free space or a discounted space. So I want to make sure that, when we're entering these sort of negotiations, that we're competitive and fair, not just to the people that we're servicing, but to the people paying. So I bring that point up.
No, through your chair to the council, I appreciate that point. We have heard it from a few, and so we're cognizant of that, Councillor. Balancing, I think, both the revenue generation needs, but also not competing with the private sector. We are there to provide a public service, and I think we need to stay in our lane, as others need to stay in their lane. And I think in this particular case, where we do public-private partnerships, there's a benefit, and we need to hold the community at the forefront of that. But yeah, I get your comment, Councillor.
Through you, another question about this site. So when we're talking about this site, and Matt's looking into it, we're all looking into it, everyone's looking into it. Right now, there's no property tax being paid that we collect. That's my understanding. So once we do, I think people need to understand that once we do sever or sell or whatever you want to call it, we have to make sure that, and you touched upon it earlier, we only have one chance to do it right, that we make sure that if it's commercials, if it's residential, if it's whatever, that, we maximize the value of that land, not just for the immediate purchase price, but for revenue down the road through property taxes. And in asking that, when would we collect property taxes once a property is sold? How long does that take? Because we're talking lags, right? We're talking financing lag.
Through you, Mr. Chair, while Charlotte's getting up, maybe I'll start talking.
Go ahead.
So I think, Councillor, a vacant property that's owned, let's say, by a business interest that wants to develop the site, there's a certain tax rate on that. I think there is going to be a requirement as the site gets developed and you start seeing whatever sort of uses on the site, whether they're a residential use, whether they're a commercial use, or anything else in terms of the various categories. Once they're up and functioning, it's at that particular point. So there will be a lag on that piece. I get your point, and I think we need to look at this both in the short term as well as the long term. So ensuring, and Matt can speak more to kind of highest and best use, but when we do look at what part of this site potentially finds itself, moving to the private sector versus public sector, I think both what we get for the site, but also what can be on the site in the future will be based on that use. And so I would suggest to you, anything we're doing now, we need to look at making sure that the site addresses all of those pieces. There's a commercial piece to it, there's a residential piece to it, because I think people want that. One of the things we heard loud and clear from a number of residents was, what is there to do for our kids, for our youth? Is there something that we can have? And is this site one of those opportunities? Again, I think it's going to be determined on, what is the final outcome for the site, but I think that's a good point. I don't know if Charlotte has anything to add about the property tax lag?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. If a portion of the land were sold, I think this is what you were asking, how long would it take before we would generate property tax revenue? So it would depend until something is built on it, like up until something is built, it would be just property tax on the land. And then you get back to the same cycle where it can take up to 1 to 2 years for MPAC to assess a property. So we're kind of always in that holding pattern where we're waiting for them to pick up on it. So could be a little bit of time.
Okay, so, yeah, sounds like a couple of years, but nonetheless, it'd be income as opposed to something's better than nothing. That's
Through you, Mr. Chair, the councilor is correct. Currently, schools don't pay property taxes, and so, you also think about all the other costs that go with potentially developing a site. So I think about the development charges, the other fees that go along with it. So those are things that we'll capture as we move down.
Thank you. And just a comment, I just bring these questions up because it's a lot of money. It's a great deal, but it's a lot of money, and I just don't want to see operations, or I don't want to see cost of maintaining all of a sudden evaporate potential revenue, immediate or in the future. So that's why I raise those issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brunet, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Reimer. So through you to the CEO, Mike, you mentioned, you said something earlier when someone asked you a question, and you said, we need to maybe be a little bit careful about what we're talking about in some regards, to what, the future of this property might be. So this council hasn't seen the Deloitte report. I have asked you why that is, and you've explained it to me, but I'm wondering if there's any value in speaking, so the community, maybe, someone sitting there going, okay, you hired this company to do a report to conduct a financial review to determine whether to buy the site, but why hasn't the Deloitte report been brought forward? Do you think there's value in speaking to that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think, so it's probably a question I'll ask Deloitte in terms of, being able to come back. I think there's always benefit to sharing some of that information, and so I think if we can find a way to share that information from Deloitte, there's nothing in there that I think, I wouldn't want members of council or anyone to see. They looked at the cost of the site, they looked at the size of the site, as I shared with you on the slides. They did an analysis in terms of the market, and they said, at least on the first phase of it, 2.85 million versus not purchasing the site, pretty easy decision. So yeah, definitely we can make sure we share the portions of that report that are appropriate. My point in being cautious is, when we asked Deloitte, look at this particular site and tell me what are the potential costs if we wanted to build on it, those costs are significant. And I think my comment was more around the premature nature of sharing a significant cost of building on that site, because I think until we hear from residents, are we building 1 million square feet? Are we building 500,000 square feet? Are we building 250,000 square feet? It's a very different conversation. And so we get focused on, well, how much does it cost per square foot to build a site? And if that number is 20, 30, or 40 million, that becomes the conversation we're having, instead of what do we want to see on the site, and potentially is there another way we can go? And so I think the caution is around when you ask a financial firm like Deloitte or KPMG or any of the other firms that do this particular work, they base it on a set of inputs, and those inputs need to be determined by the municipality, and that's why I say there's a subsequent piece that Deloitte will do and come back with. So absolutely we can share, I think, some of the market analysis, some of the analysis that they provided, and the analysis that went into, is this a good deal for us to buy right now or not? And then I think as more information from them becomes available and more inputs are gleaned, and we provide to them, and then they shoot out that analysis, we'll provide that as well, Councillor.
That's great. So through you, Chair, I just have one other question for the CEO. So Mike, when you look at an aerial photo in the report, one would clearly see the senior center and the Gretzinger pool. So, I'm wondering, because we're talking about risk, but we should be also talking about opportunities. So, there's a seniors facility there. It's an aging facility. We've made investments in it, but it's not a new building. And then we've got a pool, and I've heard people say, well, cover the pool, and then we've got an indoor pool. So are you at a position, these community engagements are very early, but I think it's important to the mayor's point, there's risk, but there's also opportunities. So I'm wondering if you could talk about the proximity to the site with those two facilities that we currently own.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. So I would say absolutely those two sites have been both part of the public conversation, but also part of the conversations with Deloitte. They're obviously there. You look at an aerial, it's very hard to miss the fact that the municipality put aside the BDSS purchase, also has some acreage in that particular area that currently houses the two sites you suggested, the Lincoln Community Center, as well as the Gretzinger Pool. You're correct that when we look at the senior center, it is an older building. Again, we've done a lot of the building assessments on all of our buildings. It is one that is reaching, that end of life. We think about what a number of municipalities are doing. Our friends to the west have made a decision to move the senior center into their new renovation and expansion of the Peach King Center. So I think a number of people are looking at, when you are doing a reno, when you do have an opportunity, is there an opportunity to amalgamate and bring services together? To me, anywhere you can put kids and seniors together, I think that's a huge positive for both. And so if there's an opportunity for us to bring, I think, to bring more seniors and more seniors programming potentially into the BDSS site, we need to explore it. And again, it is one of those things that we're looking at. So I don't think it's too premature or I'm being too, excited or by saying that I'd love to see us do something with those sites as well. Again, I think it's come up in the conversations. It could be an absolute opportunity from us, and it could, again, go into the broader conversation around how much of the site are we parting with, not parting with, what's entry into the site look like. A number of you know the site, and there's some complexities with getting in and out. Where those two facilities are is a very, I think, front-facing location. Now, I don't want all the seniors tomorrow calling me, yelling at you, yelling at me, saying, what do you mean you're selling it? That's not what we're saying. That's not what we're doing. I think what I'm saying is there's probably some opportunities to create more senior space, new senior space in the actual BDSS site, and it's something we should explore.
Thank you very much, Chair Reimer.
Thank you, Councilor Brunei. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councilor Brunei. The committee receive and file for information report FN-18-24 and associated presentation regarding the 2025 operating budget introduction. I will now ask our clerk to open the vote.
The vote is open. It's okay. Thank you. And I will close that vote. And that carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte and Mr. CEO, for your work this evening. Number 9, under confidential items, we have no confidential items this evening. Number 10, committee remarks. Does committee have any remarks this evening? All talked out. Number 11, adjournment. There being no further business, I call this meeting adjourned at 9:40. Thank you and good night.